Chapter 1493. 3 days after the underworld, messenger Hermes brought the underworld queen Persephone back from the underworld. When Persephone left the underworld and returned to the human world's winter ended and spring returned to the earth. The Lord of the Sky was very happy. He then ordered Hermes to bring Persephone directly to Mount Olympus. The underworld, the human world, and Mount Olympus seemed to have an insurmountable gap. The two sides were so far apart. Joe spent day after day in the underworld. He gradually forgot his original name and got used to the servants in the underworld palace calling him Prince Poulin, Prince of the Underworld King Hades. He really began to forget that his name was Joe. He even began to forget the voice of his father, Mr. Smith, and the appearance of his mother, Mrs. Deborah. He also began to forget the taste of his grandmother, Mrs. Ilura's borscht. He also forgot that there was once a bad big sister who always liked to bully him. Later, she threw him into this place and mysteriously disappeared. He gradually grew up. Spring went and autumn came, and another year of winter came. The underworld queen who ate the pomegranate seed once again stepped into the underworld palace when winter arrived. Joe! Prince Poulin was not ignorant. He knew that the underworld queen would spend an entire winter in the underworld like this every year. But before the end of the second winter, Prince Poulin did not meet Messenger Hermes again. Prince Poulin gradually grew up. When he was young and energetic, he became interested in the maid, GC, who had always taken care of him. He did not know what this feeling was. Later, when he chatted with the other underworld creatures in the underworld palace, Prince Poulin learned for the first time that this feeling was called love. It was a pure male liking for a woman. Prince Prin was terrified and uneasy. He didn't know what was going on with this feeling until he could gradually face his feelings and plan to formally confess to GC. But then the war started, a war that swept through the entire Mount Olympus, the sea, the earth, and the underworld. It was an extremely long war, one in which the gods fell. You will replace me and become the new Nether King, my prince. In the middle of the war, Hades, who was seriously injured, called Prince Poulin, who had been baptized by the flames of war, in front of him. Inherit the name of Hades. You will complete the unification of legends. Whether it is the past, present, or future, the war was still going on. This was indeed an unusually long war. In human domain, the headquarters of the Magician Association, the Secret Arts Tower, the private library of the first Tower Master, Tower of Radiance. It was said that there were 103,000 magic books from different eras here, many of which were extinct. But compared to these precious magic books, the vampire girl Elizabeth, who had just moved in, was more interested in the miscellaneous books here. Apart from completing the daily set of magic lessons, the vampire girl's favorite thing to do when she had a break was to flip through all kinds of anecdotes in the miscellaneous section, especially the introduction of the inhuman domain since its creation. Elizabeth. At this time, Jean Louis came to the library with some food. It was a cup of very pure blood. Recently, for some reason, a large number of pure blood had suddenly appeared on the market. These pure blood were almost the same as the pure blood produced in the farms of the 13 clans, and the price was much lower than the normal price. Because the first Tower Master's closed-door student was a vampire, the higher-ups in the association already knew, so when this kind of cheap and high-quality pure blood appeared, the purchasing department carried out a large number of purchases. Jean Louis was currently the personal maid of the first Tower Master's closed-door student, so she naturally received the supply of pure blood. Regarding the identity of a maid, the third daughter of the Zhong family obviously had no objection. As for why, probably only she herself would know. Oh, you're here. At this time, the vampire girl put down the book in her hand and looked at Jean Louis who came in. She smiled slightly. I think I forgot to eat again. Don't be too tired. Jean Louis rubbed the vampire girl's head and took out the cup filled with blood from a tray. A wizard in the association who loves to eat specially made it. I tasted it, and it tastes a bit like grapefruit. I don't know how he did it, but it made me feel like I got back my human sense of taste. The vampire girl blinked her eyes. She had been a vampire since birth, so she naturally didn't know the taste of human food. She couldn't wait to drink it, but she didn't know what it tasted like. She just felt that it was much better than the pure blood she usually drank. Slow down, don't rush. Don't read the book first. Zhong Luoyue shook her head and found that the little girl was surprisingly good at learning, but there was also etiquette when eating. She casually took the book in the little girl's hand and asked curiously, "What are you reading? You're so engrossed in it?" Why, Elizabeth, who was holding the cup, looked up and said, "It's about the history before the formation of the inhuman domain. It's about the scholars' conjectures about the fall of the Greek gods, and some of the remnants that can be found." Zhong Luoyue curiously flipped a few pages and read softly. 3 long winters caused the earth to be tortured. Snow blew from all directions and froze the entire earth. Without the sun, the world lost its warmth. In the bone-chilling cold, suspicion and conflict, war and malice dominated the world. People all over the world used spears and swords to kill each other. Blood stained the earth red. Hungry beasts wandered in search of food. People no longer sympathized with each other or helped each other. Brothers and sisters killed each other. Father and son became enemies, killing each other in ugly competition. The whole world became very uneasy, and evil spread like a plague. What is this saying? I don't seem to remember such a period in the history of the European continent. Zhong Luoyue could not help but frown. If there was such a terrible war in human history, there should be records. When she was studying in the British University, she also minored in the history of the European continent, but she did not have any impression of this. It seems to be the current state of the world before the fall of the Greek gods. The little vampire licked the blood on her lips, but she did not lick it clean. Miss Sanyang saw it and picked up a handkerchief to carefully wipe the blood for her. This war broke out suddenly. The sea, the sky, the underworld, the earth, humans, and the gods all went into this war. From some of the remaining documents found, the situation at that time must have been extremely tragic. Miss Sanyang shook her head and said, "That's even more unreasonable. Where did such a world war happen?" While Elizabeth thought for a moment and said, "There is a speculation that the gods and humans in this war actually lived in a world similar to ours. It's a time cut from a period of our world's history." "You mean world fragments?" Zhong Luoyue was startled. Strictly speaking, her concept of the world fragments was still quite vague. This knowledge was also what she had heard during this period of time in the association. She was like a sponge, crazily absorbing all the knowledge that could be absorbed. The little vampire nodded and said, "Yes, the scholar who wrote this book believes that the divine kingdom of the Greek gods, which is the inhuman realm that we live in now, and the sea, earth, and the underworld mentioned in the war, should be a connected, complete, and huge world fragment. And this world fragment was finally divided because of the war that ended the world. So, there are a few other dimensions similar to the inhuman realm, the sea, the earth, and the underworld." Zhong Luoyue could not help but stick out her tongue, and then quickly calm down. Recently, her cognition and 3 views had been constantly refreshed, and she had long been used to the current bizarre and variegated world. This is just a scholar's guess, and it hasn't been confirmed yet. While Elizabeth shook her head, Zhong Luoyue blinked and read a few more pages. Then she said, "If these gods are really so powerful, how did they die in the end? Can gods be killed?" She said, "According to some of the documents excavated from the inhuman realm, it seems that in the middle and later stages of the war, a very terrifying weapon appeared on the battlefield. Because of the appearance of this weapon, all living beings and gods died one after another. In the end, not many survived." Zhong Luoyue opened her mouth. "A weapon? What weapon?" The little girl said, "I don't know what it is exactly. I'm looking at these documents to see if there are any similar records, but I can't find any. The only thing I know is that this weapon can bring death, and it's called Hades." "Hades? Hades?" Miss San asked in surprise. The vampire girl shook her head and said, "It's not referring to the master of the underworld, but the name of this weapon. It's called Hades." Finally, Miss San lost interest in these distant and specious myths and history that had not been confirmed. She put the book on the table and said, "Why, Elizabeth, I'm going out later. I've already prepared dinner, and the servant will send it to you. Remember to eat." "You, where are you going?" the vampire girl asked casually. She spent most of her time in the library, and, relatively speaking, she did not know what Jean Luoyue usually did. "Nothing." Jean Luoyue smiled and said, "I heard that there's a black market auction today, and I just want to go and see it. It seems that something amazing has appeared in this black market auction, and the secret pharmacists in the association seem to have gone crazy. They even went around borrowing money to participate in the auction. Even I was asked, 'Is there anything good?' While Elizabeth was not very interested in this. She lowered her head and continued to read the unfinished document. Jean Luoyue tidied up and said casually, 'It seems to be the work of a legendary secret pharmacist. I heard that any work of this legendary secret pharmacist can be sold for a sky-high price.' 'Oh, then be careful.' Why, Elizabeth nodded, but it was not clear if she heard it. However, when Jean Luoyue was about to leave, the little girl suddenly took out a card and said, There are 10 million secret crystals in this card. Take a look and buy whatever you want. I'm sorry that I didn't accompany you properly during this period of time." Looking at the little girl casually taking out 10 million secret crystals, Miss San could not help but open her mouth. Why did this scene feel so familiar? Because I didn't accompany you properly? Take it and buy something? What the hell is this? However, in the face of this huge sum of money, the third young lady of the Zhong family silently accepted it. Although this third young lady was a descendant of the Zhong family of China and had a huge amount of wealth, that wealth was worthless in the inhuman domain. Therefore, Miss San could be said to be penniless in the inhuman realm. She was a poor person. Why, Elizabeth, how did you get so many secret crystals? Miss San could not help but ask in the end, "I remember you said that your grandfather didn't leave you so much inheritance?" Why, Elizabeth did not even turn her head and said, "Oh, my teacher gave it to me. He said it's pocket money." "Ha, fear, Jean Luoyue. This is the real power of money." Miss San secretly smiled bitterly. When she thought of the power of money, she naturally thought of the guy who always had a smile on his face. She thought of the short few hours she spent with him in the underground maze of the gambling god manor. She shook her head and took a deep breath to clear her mind. With tens of millions of secret crystals in her arms, Miss Sin suddenly realized that she could do a lot of things. Although she had already become a vampire, the third Miss had not been idle during her days in the association. With her skills, it was easy for her to become familiar with many magicians and magi, and she even passed some tests for free. The results were that, as a vampire, the third Miss potential was only average. At the very most, she could reach the level of an ordinary elite among the vampires. This made Miss San, who had always been an excellent person, feel as if she was doused with a bucket of cold water. She suddenly became confused about the future. She did not want to rely on why Elizabeth's protection for the rest of her life. There's no such thing as sincerity and unconditional feelings. The third young mistress looked at the carriage that was about to leave for the black market auction and muttered to herself, "If you want to obtain sincerity, then you have to make yourself equal to the other party, whether she was an inhuman or not." As a descendant of a big family, there was a concept that had been deeply rooted in Miss San's bones. That concept was called equal social status. Chapter 1494. The third Miss was riding in the car of a student of a senior secret apothecary in the Secret Arts Tower. This senior secret apothecary was clearly a fan of the mysterious legendary secret apothecary and the author of the auction item. Thus, he had already prepared a huge sum of money for emergencies. And this huge sum of money was obtained from a student, or rather, from the student's parent. The family of this senior secret apothecary student was in the secret medicine business. This could be said to be a very reasonable alliance between the strong. The third Miss, who had been in the workplace for many years, was used to this kind of relationship. If there's a chance, I'll take you to the Sea of God to take a look. Legend has it that it's the bathing place of the gods before they fell. Maybe we'll find something interesting there. Thank you, Fontes. The third Miss smiled at the handsome man in front of her. I also want to go and take a look, but I need Miss Elizabeth's approval. This handsome man, the senior secret apothecary student. The motive behind such a passionate action was obvious. Unlike the fear humans had towards non-humans, in the non-human domain, it was normal for non-humans to be together with non-humans. Although it was rare for the spouse to be a vampire, it wasn't impossible. Since she had a suitor, and a capable one at that, why not make use of it? Children who grew up in the business world would rarely reject this. Would she be worried that Fontes would act recklessly? The answer was no. Elizabeth was the first Tower Master's student, and she was Elizabeth's personal maid. This was a very protective identity. So no matter what kind of thoughts this Fontes had behind his handsome and straightforward face, he wouldn't show it, and would always maintain his current refined and courteous manner. Oh, it's all right. I think Miss Elizabeth is a magnanimous person. Fontes smiled slightly and softly said to Jean Louis, perhaps you can introduce me to Miss Elizabeth. I believe she'll be moved by my sincerity. He's going to reveal his true motive so soon. Sure enough, he's still too young. The third Miss secretly sighed in her heart. Purely judging from the perspective of an aristocratic family's child, this Fontes, who had some assets in his family, was really unpresentable. That's wonderful, Fontes. Third Miss revealed a gratified expression at this moment. You're such a sincere person. Miss Elizabeth will definitely appreciate you, Fontes. However, you might need to wait for some time, as the Radiance Pagoda Master has given Miss Elizabeth a rather heavy learning task. She is not allowed to meet with outsiders during this period of time. This is truly a pity. Fontes revealed a slightly disappointed expression. Still too inexperienced. The Jean family's third Miss casually glanced at him, and then said in a soft and weak voice, I think that the Radiance Tower's Tower Master doesn't like Miss Elizabeth coming into contact with people outside the association so early, and wants to protect Miss Elizabeth. But how can you be a bad man, Fontes? I will definitely find an opportunity for you. Oh, you really are my angel. Fontes suddenly became emotional as he looked at Jean Louis with deep affection, as if he wanted to kiss her. At this time, Jean Louis unhurriedly used the fan in her hand to block Fontes' lips and said with a charming smile, Don't forget that I'm a vampire. Aren't you afraid that I'll bite your lips? Just thinking about it is very exciting. Fontes' eyes suddenly lit up as some kind of desire spread in his eyes, without any concealment. Jean Louis said indifferently, Fontes, you're a sincere person, so please don't make me feel that you're the same as other men who only want a night of pleasure. If that's the case, I'll feel very disappointed. Right now, her eyes were filled with grief. Her expression seemed to be filled with grief, and even her voice sounded like she was crying and complaining. Her soft and moving appearance made Fontes feel like an ant on a hot pit, but he really couldn't figure out what this woman was thinking. His family's intention was to let him get hold of this maid and then come into contact with Miss Elizabeth. This was basically a hot topic among the younger generation in the Magician Association. They were mainly interested in Elizabeth, who was behind Jean Louis. It wasn't that Fontes didn't have any competitors. On the contrary, he had a lot of competitors. Obviously, he wasn't willing to lower the favorability that he worked so hard to raise and push the prey that was about to be in his hands to other hunters. He could only restrain the evil fire in his body and return to his cultured and elegant appearance. He said affectionately, You believe me, you're so charming. All the men in the world will make the same mistake as me. All the men in the world? Not necessarily. At least, that person probably wouldn't. Jean Louis smiled faintly. When the desire in Fontes' eyes subsided, she was actually secretly relieved. This couldn't be compared to her past. Now that she was really alone, it was like walking on thin ice. If she wasn't careful, she was afraid that she would fall here. Fortunately, even if he was an inhuman with extraordinary powers, his personality didn't seem to be much different from that of a normal person. Or rather, it was because this was the inhuman domain, and because there was the restriction of the Magician Association, that these guys with extraordinary powers could still behave themselves. Fontes, you're really the best man I've ever seen. The third miss smiled sweetly at this moment and immediately said without leaving a trace, "Not like Sean, who's always so tough." "Sean?" Fontes snorted at this moment and said disdainfully, "He's just a country bumpkin nouveau riche whose family does black market business. If he dares to mess around, you must tell me." Jean Luoyue said worriedly, "Is it okay, Fontes? I heard that Sean's family has a lot of influence in the black market of the inhuman domain. That's his family's influence, not Sean's." Fontes said contemptuously, "This ignorant and incompetent guy doesn't have a high position in his family. His family's business in the black market will probably only be inherited by his brother. Of course, the black market business is still a black market business after all. It can't see the light at all. It's not like our family, which has a formal license of the association. There's no comparison between the two." "That's true." The third miss smiled and said, "I'm starting to look forward to the following auction. It's the first time I've seen an auction in the inhuman domain. Fontes, can you tell me about the main event of this auction? I've only heard about it, but I don't know much about it." "Of course," Fontes said with a smile. "Actually, there's nothing particularly eye-catching in this auction. My family and my teacher originally didn't plan to participate. But suddenly, there was a rumor that the legendary, which would be adding a bottle of 4-star recovery potion. That's why the auction became so lively, and they even made it an invitation. It's so mysterious. It's just a bottle of 4-star secret medicine. Why would it make people so crazy?" Jean Luoyue really didn't understand. Moreover, she was very interested. She had always been very interested in the high value of this kind of product. It was completely different from the boring topic of discussing the fall of the Greek gods with Elizabeth. "You don't know, but let's not talk about the fact that many famous secret pharmacists are fans of the legendary witch. Just the fact that the secret medicine personally made by the legendary, which can't be replicated, is enough to make people scramble like ducks." Fontes said seriously. Jean Luoyue didn't understand and said, "Since it can't be replicated, then even if you get it, you can only use it once. You don't seem to know how to make people go crazy?" Fontes laughed and said, "Of course there's a way. The 4-star medicine that appeared in this auction can only be considered high quality. But it can't be denied that it came from the hands of the legendary witch. Because as long as it's a medicine made by the legendary witch, its effect is at least 30% higher than a medicine of the same level. That is, although it's only a 4-star medicine, its effect is better than a 5-star medicine on the market. Do you understand now? You want to crack the secret of the legendary witch medicine making?" Jean Luoyue keenly felt the real intention of these guys. Fontes nodded and said, "Using the same materials and the same cost to produce a higher level product. The profit in this can be said to be immeasurable. More importantly, if the legendary witch method can be used on other high-level medicines, think about it. How much wealth would that be?" How could the third miss not understand the problem of production cost? She was probably much clearer than this Fontes. "This legendary witch is really powerful. I don't know who she is. It seems that very few people know her origin." Fontes nodded and said with a sigh, "Yes, regarding the legendary witch, there are very few people who know. Even if there are people who know, they themselves know very little. What everyone is familiar with is probably the name of the legendary witch." "Pansy, what did you say?" The third miss of the Zhong family couldn't help but stare blankly at this time. "I said Pansy," Fontes said with astonishment. "This is the name that the legendary witch uses." "You don't know?" This is the first time I've heard of it." Jean Luoyue shook her head, but there was a rather strange feeling in her heart. Pansy. She remembered that when she was still in the Chirito clan castle, the woman with the paper bag mask seemed to have called the woman beside Luaccio the Pansy. Could it be that it was the same person? But this Pansy master, didn't she become famous more than 30 years ago? Jean Liu's heart suddenly moved at this time, and suddenly asked coldly, "Fontes, do you know the origin of the person who auctioned the legendary witch's works this time?" Fontes thought for a while and said, "I'm not very clear about the details, but I heard that it seems to be an independent witch who opened a magic house. She came from Britain. You see, Britain has been sanctioned by Europe, and even the magicians and witches there can only do business in the black market. How pitiful. Could it be? Could it be that coincidental? Could this witch be the witch Maria who was wearing the paper bag headgear? The black market auction soon began. It was in a private mansion in the neutral chaotic area of the inhuman domain. Just as fun as it said, the quality of the goods in this auction was indeed average. It had already started for more than half of the time, but there were actually quite a few unsold bids. Almost 70% of the guests here were here for the legendary witch's work, and among these 70% guests, most of them were secret pharmacists or merchants who were involved in the secret medicine business. The organizer probably understood that the remaining goods couldn't attract these people who were only interested in the secret medicine, so he directly proposed the final item. I believe that everyone can't wait anymore. Now, let's officially enter the final auction. The auctioneer picked up the mallet in his hand and fiercely knocked on the podium, attracting everyone's attention. Everyone immediately quieted down and looked at the final item that was about to appear. Like most of the guests, when they heard that the final item was going to appear, a bored woman who was cutting her toenails in a private room in the auction venue quickly raised her head. That's right. Dragging it out, they already took it out. They made me wait for so long. Her eyes were filled with resentment. It was Ms. Witch, Ms. Maria. Watching the hostess carefully take out the tray with the secret medicine, Ms. Witch's eyes seemed to see piles of secret crystals being thrown at her, and her heart couldn't help but beat faster. Enough chit-chat. This bottle of legendary witch's work has been appraised by professionals, and it's definitely authentic. Also, it's a 4-star potion with a 5-star effect. What's more, this potion was completed recently. I believe that everyone knows the value of this potion, right? So, the starting price is 500,000 secret crystals, and the price must be no less than 50,000 secret crystals each time. Is there anyone who wants a bid? The auctioneer fiercely knocked on the podium. 600,000, 700,000, 800,000, 1 million, 3 million. Looking at the rapidly increasing number, Miss Witch's breathing also gradually quickened. It was as if there was a strong man pushing her from behind, continuously sending her to the peak of happiness. 5 million, 6 million, 8 million. Ms. Witch's face was flushed, and her hands tightly grasped the armrests of the chair. 9 million, 10 million, 11 million. At this moment, Ms. Witch forcefully straightened her legs. She forcefully straightened her legs, and her toes were fiercely curled together. 13 million and 3 million. 15 million. 20 million. Ms. Witch directly stood up at this moment, and her legs were quietly clamped together. Her eyes were spitting fire, and she was panting heavily, sweating profusely. 30 million. 40 million. 45 million. 50 million. 50 million going once. 50 million going twice. 50 million going thrice. Sold. As the deal of 50 million was completed, the auctioneer who made the sky-high price also became excited at this moment. He held the mallet and waved it. Congratulations to guest number 76 for winning this legendary witch's. Pa! Crack! The moment the auctioneer waved the mallet and turned around, the mallet directly hit the bottle of the secret medicine. Breaking the bottle directly, the broken bottle splashed the potion on the breasts of the hostess. But no one paid attention to the hostess's appearance at this moment. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air at the same time, and the auction house instantly became strangely quiet. The auctioneer stood there dumbstruck, his arms trembling nonstop. With a thud, it came from one of the rooms, which Maria fell to the ground with tears streaming down her face. Instantly lost, it was a huge fortune. Chapter 1495. This bottle of potion is fake. It must be fake. It must be fake. All of a sudden, in the silent auction hall, a sharp and mournful cry of a woman rang out. The degree of mournfulness of this cry made many of the men present involuntarily think of those women who had been pressed under their bodies before. It seemed that at the last moment, they would always let out a high-pitched cry similar to a decibel. Of course, in such a serious occasion, under the watchful eyes of so many big shots in the industry. Naturally, no one would do such shameful things in the private room. This was not the little plain plane, after all. How could there be so many idiotic rich kids wandering around outside? Therefore, this must be a crazy fan of the legendary witch who couldn't accept that the witch's potion was destroyed by the auctioneer's wooden mallet. It must be like this. That's right, this must be fake. It must be fake. I will never admit that the work of the legendary witch will be destroyed by an auctioneer's wooden mallet. I will never accept it. This is definitely an insult to the legendary witch. It wasn't certain whether it was an insult or not. Looking at the crowd that gradually became excited, Jean-Louis, who came with Fantas, also had a private room, couldn't help but frown. The enthusiasm of these big shots in the secret medicine industry for the legendary witch's work had even exceeded her expectations. Fantas, what would the auction organizer do in such a situation? The third miss couldn't help but ask curiously. Of course, it wasn't just purely out of curiosity, but also because she wanted to know the rules of the market in the inhuman domain. There must be a lot of rules that were different from human society. Fantas thought for a while and smiled bitterly. Even if you ask like this, I'm afraid I don't know how to answer you. After all, this kind of situation didn't seem to have happened before. How could the bottle be destroyed like this? After all, this is the work of the legendary witch. It's really a pity and too ridiculous. 50 million secret crystals. I think this time the Shang-En family is really going to vomit blood. Shang-En was the child of the black market merchant who competed with Fantas to pursue the third miss. Fantas was naturally overjoyed in this situation, but he had to maintain his poise. I can wait for the auction to announce how to deal with it. Probably the boss here doesn't know what to think now. Fantas laughed lightly, but suddenly his head was hit hard by someone. But this young master didn't dare to get angry because the person who hit his head wasn't an outsider, but his teacher, a high-level secret medicine master in the association. You bastard! How can you still laugh at this? The legendary witch's potion, a secret medicine that is like a holy object, was destroyed by an auctioneer. This is simply a disaster for the secret medicine industry. This is a sad day. You bastard, you actually laughed. I'll kill you. Teacher, Aya. The third miss, who couldn't bear to see this scene, shook her head and quietly left the room. Actually, although this Fantas was like an embroidered pillow, he had the advantage of being easy to control. But this kind of character was really the voice of the woman who screamed just now. The third miss frowned and subconsciously walked towards the room where the woman screamed. In the room, the atmosphere was unbearably cold. The organizer of the auction was urgently communicating with the owner of the witch's secret medicine. It was Witch Maria. I'm serious. 50 million secret crystals. You have to compensate me. Otherwise, I'll plant sunflower seeds behind your boss's butt. Believe me, I'll turn him into a walking sunflower. Not only your boss, but you too. Your whole auction house is a sunflower. Don't you know who I am? At this moment, the enraged demoness stepped on the table and grabbed the steward's collar with both hands. She lifted the old steward up and revealed the face of an evil person. I know who you are, Miss Maria. You're the witch of destruction, the witch who single-handedly defeated the evil dragon poachers. Who in the black market hasn't heard of your name? Please let me go. I'm so old. I can't stand the torture of sunflower seeds. The white-haired manager kept begging for mercy. Maria pushed him away and crossed her arms. I don't care. You have to compensate me for my loss. Otherwise, I'll plant sunflower seeds all over your butt. The manager nervously wiped his cold sweat and wrangled. Miss Maria, you can't blame us for this. How could we let such a valuable thing be broken by a wooden mallet? You said that our auctioneer is just an ordinary guy, not a strength-type hero like the legendary hero Kroloa. What do you mean? You want to wrangle with me, right? Maria immediately snorted coldly and said, According to what you're saying, could it be that the things I gave you were all lies? Don't forget that when I took out the potion, 3 of your secret pharmacists were there to verify it. Maria sneered. You checked it, packed it, and took it away from me. Now, it's broken by your people. and you dare to doubt me? Are you tired of living? That's not what we mean, Miss Maria. The manager's bitter face almost squeezed out tears. It's just that we're running a small business. Where can we get 50 million secret crystals for you in such a short time? Even if you sell our boss, he can't get so much money. Maria stopped talking and looked at the old man coldly. She reached into her collar and took out a handful of sunflower seeds. 50 million seeds. You can choose for yourself. Miss Maria, I'm so old. Stop. I know. I'll discuss it with the big boss. I'll give you a satisfactory answer. Stop. F*CK off. I'll give you half an hour. At this moment, the old steward was halfway through joining the guild. He lifted his pants, which had been dragged halfway down his body, and scrambled out of the door of the private room. Old thing, if you're half a step late, I'll stuff your ass full. At this moment, Maria slowly exhaled. Then, she looked like she was about to cry. My 50 million. 50 million. While Miss, which was feeling sad, the door of the private room suddenly opened. Maria shivered and said angrily, Old thing, how dare you come back without money? It's you? The person who pushed open the door and entered was third Miss Jean. Jean Luoyue. I just saw an old gentleman in a hurry with his pants up. Well, do you have this kind of hobby? Jean Luoyue frowned slightly. Maria opened her mouth and suddenly found that she couldn't explain this matter, so she didn't explain. Instead, she thought for a while and said, Why are you here? You're here, which means that Miss Vampire is also nearby. Thank you so much for what you did last time. It's really you. Jean Luoyue nodded at this time. I wasn't sure before. Maria couldn't help but be stunned, and then she remembered that when she met this woman in front of her, she had been wearing a craft paper bag. So, what she said at the beginning was a means to test me. She was really a person with a lot of bad intentions. Maria couldn't help but glare at Jean Luoyue. When she first met Jean Luoyue, she argued for a long time about how to escape, so she didn't want to deal with this tough woman. Jean Luoyue probably guessed Maria's thoughts. At this time, she gently closed the door and walked in. I'll bring your thanks to Elizabeth. She's not here. I came to this auction with someone else, and I didn't know you were here. Oh, I see. Maria nodded and then lost interest. She didn't care about meeting acquaintances in this place. In fact, she met many acquaintances in this auction, but she didn't want to take the initiative to greet anyone. Her mind was now full of the 50 million secret crystals. There was one thing that the old manager was right about. How could a good potion be broken so easily? The bottles that secret pharmacists used to store potions were usually specially made, not to mention using a wooden mallet. Even if a high-grade potion bottle was hit with a big hammer, it might not break. Maria was sure that the potion she handed over was genuine. If it wasn't genuine, she wouldn't have sent it here to be auctioned and ruined her own reputation. Could it be that in the auction, someone secretly tampered with the pansy master's work that was originally put up for auction and turned it into a dragon instead? Miss Witch calmed down at this time. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that this possibility was very high. After all, this wasn't an ordinary valuable item, but the work of the legendary witch. The potion contained the secret that could raise the potion's effect by 1 star. This secret would probably make all secret pharmacists go crazy. Are you thinking about someone secretly switching your potion? Jean Luoyue suddenly said at this time. How did you know? Maria subconsciously raised her head, only to see this hateful woman looking at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. She knew that she had a big mouth after all. She couldn't help but frown when she was casually tricked into speaking. The third miss said indifferently, Actually, there's nothing special about it. After something like this happened, any normal person would think in this way. Just look at the increase in price in the auction just now, and you'll know how precious this bottle of medicine is. Do you know something? Maria said directly, I lost a lot this time, but if you have any clues that can help me recover my losses, I can give you 5%. 3% of the final value of the potion this time. 20%. Anything less than this is off the table, the third lady said indifferently at this time. We're ancestors pirates? Miss Witch looked at her in disbelief. as if she was looking at a rare animal. My ancestors were soldiers who made great contributions to the nation. The third lady's eyes were indifferent, but there was a sense of respect in her expression. Maria was silent for a while before she shook her head and said, 20% is too much. I worked very hard to get this potion. 10% is the most I can give you, and it's because you helped me leave the castle. If it's more than this amount, I won't talk about it. Even without your clues, I can still solve this matter. It's just a matter of time. Deal. Jean Louis said directly at this time. 10% is no problem, but I want to add a condition. What condition? Maria asked carefully. Jean Louis smiled and said, let's be friends. Miss Witch. Maria looked at Jean Louis as if she was meeting her for the first time, and suddenly said, you're a businessman? I used to be. The third lady smiled at this time, and then said, from now on, I'm still a businessman. Okay, what should we do next? Maria was also a straightforward person. Jean Louis said, to be honest, what do you think the probability of success is if you want to ask for compensation from the owner of this auction house like this? Basically 0. Maria said casually, the owner of this auction house is famous for being stingy. If it wasn't for the fact that this auction house has the best reputation, I would be too lazy to cooperate with them. Other auction houses' fees are 5% lower than this auction house's. Yes, it is indeed impossible to make the other party hand over 50 million secret crystals obediently. The third lady nodded. Because this transaction didn't happen in the end, the investor who won the potion won't be stupid enough to hand over the secret crystals. I think the auction house is probably in a terrible situation in front of that investor now. Don't say things that even a child can think of. It makes me feel like I'm throwing the 10% profit into the ocean. Maria shook her head. The third lady shook her head and waved at Maria. Come here. I'll tell you in detail what you should do. You better have a good idea. Miss Witch said indifferently, my sunflower seed, it doesn't matter where it is planted. I promise it will make you go to heaven. I won't let you down. Jean Louis smiled. This smile was pure and not pretentious, but it made Maria feel like she had fallen into a trap. What did you say? Brittle attribute? In a luxurious room inside the auction house, the owner of the auction house was listening to the words of a magician beside him. This magician was a freelance magician who didn't belong to the Magician Association. The owner of the auction house spent a lot of money to invite this magician. Yes, this bottle that contains the potion has the brittle attribute engraved on the inside of the bottle. The consultant nodded at this time. This will make the special bottle used to contain the potion into an ordinary bottle. It will even be more fragile and will break upon collision. This is why the mallet will break with a casual knock. Of course, your auctioneer will knock the bottle, which is probably your misfortune. The face of the owner of the auction house twitched slightly. He had already sent the auctioneer backstage to be whipped. But who would engrave such a boring spell in such a precious potion bottle? I don't know about this. The consultant shrugged and said casually, maybe the person who gave the potion didn't intend to give it to others, or maybe he didn't do it willingly. Chapter 1496. For the owner of the auction house, it didn't matter who engraved the magic spell on the potion bottle. What was important was that this thing was broken under his watch. Moreover, it was done under the watchful eyes of the public. Even if he wanted to deny it, he couldn't. Moreover, the reason why he could stand firm in the black market was because of his good reputation. But if he had to pay 50 million secret crystals in one go, it would be like letting out blood. People who did business knew that assets didn't equal to liquid funds. The auction house had a large business, but in fact, it had many goods that were hard to sell. The issue of compensation was the biggest headache for the owner of the auction house. Did she really say that? After hearing the report of the manager, the owner of the auction house couldn't help but move his body. In the end, he chose to stand up from the chair. Otherwise, he would always feel very unnatural. Yes, boss. The owner of the auction house shook his head. Although the item was sold, it hasn't been officially handed over. We didn't take the money from a buyer. 50 million is equivalent to asking us to pay the full amount. This is impossible. The old manager frowned. He thought that the owner of the auction house, who was famous for being stingy, didn't just want to pay the base price of the auction item. If so, that which would definitely be furious. The manager's eyes couldn't help but become strange. That's not what I mean. The owner of the auction house coughed twice awkwardly. I'm talking about bartering, using treasures of the same value as the compensation. You go to the warehouse and find a few things to estimate the price. If the price is not too different, take them out and send them to the witch. The manager opened his mouth. Why did he feel like he had dropped an egg to return a piece of vegetable? How did this guy come up with such a stingy idea? Estimate? How could there be an accurate estimate of the value of the items taken out for auction? A piece of junk could be sold at a high price if it was exaggerated. Boss, this witch is also a businesswoman. She's not easy to fool, right? The manager felt that it was necessary to remind him. But the owner of the auction house said, You think I don't know? I'm not stupid. Do I really let you pick out the junk? You go and pick out a few magic accessories of good quality. Then put in the thing we bought last month. That thing is a hot potato anyway. I'm worried about how to deal with it. Then all right. The old steward thought for a moment and finally nodded. I think it's a good idea. Now that things have come to this, it's useless for that witch to make a fuss. I'll go and discuss it with her. Just as the auction owner was about to approve it, someone hurried in from outside and handed over a note, saying that it was sent by Maria. The auctioneer hurriedly took it and glanced at it. Then, his expression became a little strange. The old steward and the highly paid consultant in the room couldn't help but look over curiously. What did she write? The boss of the auction house frowned at first, but then he gradually relaxed. He smiled and said, It seems that this witch is not like the rumors. She doesn't fight at the slightest disagreement. Take a look. The boss of the auction house spread the note in front of them. They came over to take a look. The old steward was stunned after reading it. It can be done like this. It turned out that the note was written with Maria's solution. This time, the work of the legendary, which was finally proven to be a fake. As for why it could fool the appraisal of the auction house, it was entirely because the goods were enchanted with a very high-level illusion that even exceeded the ability of the appraiser. That was why it deceived everyone. This time, if it weren't for the auctioneer's mallet, it would have caused great losses to both the auction house and the buyer. This meant that Maria directly gave up 50 million secret crystals as compensation. But there were two additional requirements. First, the compensation was 8 million secret crystals. Second, the auction house had to deduct 6% of the total profit from every auction until the 50 million secret crystals were deducted. Isn't she afraid that we'll go back on our word? The steward asked curiously. But we have to sign a contract. The auctioneer smiled bitterly. Besides, even if we don't sign the contract, you may be able to go back on your word. You can run away and hide in the real world. She may not be able to find you for the rest of her life. But I can't. If I run away, what about my business? What about my family? What about the business that I've worked so hard to manage for so many years? You have to tell me. All right, let's do as she says. Who was the one who said that this witch only knew how to be rash? She's simply a snake beauty. The old steward nodded and immediately said, Do you want to go to the storeroom and order something? The boss of the auction thought for a while and said, Yes, order 2 more items and send them to the customer who bid for the elixir. A guy who can easily take out 50 million secret crystals will definitely be a big customer of ours in the future. We have to seize the opportunity. As for the other thing, well, you can send it to Maria. Take it as a return of the favor. As for whether that thing is a treasure or trash in her hands, it depends on her luck. Damn, this Maria is really something. She's so smart. If I didn't already have a wife, I would definitely marry her. TSK, this woman's figure is really good. Hee, what's this? This thing is worth 8 million secret crystals? Maria couldn't help but frown. She looked at the thing that the old steward sent over like an old dog. It was a green bracelet that looked like it was made of jade. Of course not. The old steward was still smiling like a dog's head. Miss Maria, the 8 million secret crystals you asked for are here. This is an anonymous secret crystal card. Please count it. As the saying goes, A bird in the hand is worth more than 10 birds in the bush. Maria put away the secret crystal card first. Although the difference in her heart was still huge, it was not completely unacceptable, because the old steward had already said that the bottle was engraved with the attribute of fragile. Maria didn't even say anything. Based on what she had experienced with Master Pansy, it seemed that he could do it. Of course he could do it. The Master the Pansy. What about this thing? Maria looked at the bracelet in front of her again. The old manager's saliva flew everywhere as he said, "This thing is a treasure that our big boss has just received recently. Its origin is not small. This was found in a relic of the inhuman domain. I think you know the predecessor of the inhuman domain. This bracelet might be something that the gods used in the Greek pantheon era. If you can unlock the secret of this bracelet, I'm afraid its value will be higher than the work of the legendary witch. Our boss sincerely wants to make friends with you, Miss Maria." "I don't believe you." Maria snorted coldly. "Who doesn't know that your boss is famous for being stingy? An item from the gods in the Greek pantheon era? This is probably something that was fished out from a stinking dish." The old steward was still smiling like a spring breeze. Maria shook her head and waved her hand rather disinterestedly. "Okay, go back and tell your boss that I'll come to collect the money on time next month. Don't go back on your word, or you'll have to bear the consequences." Sure. Seeing the old steward open the door and leave with a sigh of relief. After closing the door, the third lady of the Zhong family walked out from behind the screen with a smile. She walked to Maria and stretched out her hand. "Here, these 1,000,000 secret crystals are yours." Miss Witch waved her hand generously at this moment. The third lady couldn't help but frown. 10%. Maria shrugged. "I'll pay you another 1,000,000 next month after I collect the money, divided into 5 payments. The third lady had to shake her head. She wouldn't pursue this issue and lower her status. She glanced at the bracelet on the table and picked it up casually. Maria hurriedly said with a sharp voice, "This thing is worth at least 3 million. 3 million. You heard it. This is an item from the gods in the Greek pantheon era." The third lady sneered and threw the bracelet back. Miss Witch had to smile embarrassedly. "This is for you. Well, this is for Miss Vampire. Take it as a thank you gift for last time." Zhong Luoyue took the bracelet slowly at this time. She wasn't interested in this thing, but she suddenly remembered that Elizabeth seemed to be very interested in the Greek pantheon era, so she planned to give it to her. However, she came out empty-handed tonight and was wearing a formal dress. There was no place to hide anything on her body, so she simply wore the bracelet on her wrist. "This is my messenger number in the inhuman domain." Maria gave a badge at this time, and then wrote a note. "This is my phone number in the modern world. Let's make friends?" Third young miss smiled and accepted the gifts. But before she left, she suddenly turned around and looked at Maria. She smiled mysteriously and said, "You won't lose out if you make friends with me. Elizabeth is now the inner disciple of Radiance Tower Master." The door was still closed, but Maria couldn't help but feel a little puzzled, thinking about the last words Zhong Luoyue said. "Master of Radiance Tower. Master of Radiance Tower. Who is Radiance? F***CK, the first Tower Master of the Magician Association, the first person in the inhuman domain, Radiance." Lady Witch, who jumped up abruptly, had the urge to lift her skirt and chase after Zhong Luoyue. She could just give him 5,000,000 secret crystals. What's that on your wrist?" On the carriage returning to the association's headquarters, the noble young Master Fontes quickly noticed the strange bracelet on the third lady's wrist and became curious. Zhong Liue's eyes turned and said half-truthfully, "This bracelet seems to be a treasure prepared for the next auction. When I went out to the washroom, I met an acquaintance who gave it to me." An item from an auction, an acquaintance. This made it easy for the noble young Master Fontes to connect the dots. His expression changed imperceptibly. Then he smiled and said, "This bracelet looks simple and grand. It must be very precious. The person who gave this gift is quite considerate." The third lady nodded with a smile. "It can be considered as a proof of friendship." Fontes's pupils shrank slightly, Then his smile became more brilliant. Is that so? But I think you is more suitable to wear this necklace, this magic necklace. In addition to being made with rubies, also has several defensive tactics, is most suitable for a beauty like you. It was probably prepared early. Fontes took out a box with both hands. So beautiful. It was indeed beautiful. With this kind of unique design, even Jean Luoyue, who was used to seeing jewelry, couldn't help but be a little moved. Can I put it on for you personally? Fontes said with a burning gaze. You really are a gentleman, Fontes. The third lady's expression didn't change. In the end, she slowly lifted the long hair behind her back and turned around. But at the same time, she seemed to casually use the folding fan to cover her chest. I'll just take it as scattering some meat, she thought. Jean Luoyue had always asked herself, after becoming an inhuman, what capital did she have? What she had was the only capital a woman had. Fontes immediately smiled a little proudly. He didn't mind Jean Luoyue's little defensive action. The key was to close the distance. As long as this distance was constant, the prey naturally wouldn't be able to escape. There was no need to rush. He understood the principle of boiling a frog in warm water. But just as he picked up the necklace and was about to put it on for Jean Luoyue, the carriage suddenly shook violently. Then, with a loud bang, the carriage was directly blown up into the sky. Fontes could feel the fluctuation of magic. The moment the carriage exploded, he activated the defense of the necklace in time, so he wasn't injured. But he was also affected by the impact of the explosion and was directly thrown more than 10 meters away. Jean Luoyue wasn't far from him. Are you okay? No, just a little dizzy. Who is this? On the greenish-black flagstone road, a guy wearing a black cloak was seen standing in the air, probably relying on some kind of tactic or the ability of an item male. He used the cold eyes hidden under the mask to look down, sizing up Fontes and Jean Luoyue. In the next moment, without any warning, he directly rushed towards Jean Luoyue. After all, Jean Luoyue had lived in the army for a period of time, so she was much calmer than the average rich girl. At this time, she didn't panic. Facing the attack of the black-cloaked man, she instantly summoned the immature vampire power, and her strength suddenly increased. She jumped up and barely dodged the sneak attack of the black-cloaked man. Vampire? The black-cloaked man seemed to be a bit surprised and immediately said in a low voice, "Where did this newborn vampire come from? Hell King isn't something that your 13 families can touch." What? Third Miss expressed that she didn't understand what the other party was saying. But at this time, Fontes' bodyguards who heard the news had already rushed over and surrounded the black-cloaked man with their fastest speed. Not only these bodyguards, but Fontes' teacher who came with them this time, the association's high-level secret pharmacist, was also alarmed. I'm the Magician Association's high-level secret pharmacist, Vitch. Who are you? How dare you openly attack the people of the Magician Association? Fontes' teacher shouted at this time. The black-cloaked man looked around, and after taking a deep look at Jean Luoyue, he suddenly rushed into the sky. People of the Magician Association, go back and tell your Radiance Tower's master. We won't let this thief go. The domain of the gods will take it back. The black-cloaked man disappeared into the night sky, leaving behind a group of people who were at a loss. Jean Luoyue looked at the direction where the mysterious black-cloaked man disappeared, and her intuition told her that the other party seemed to be coming for her. The thing in her hand. She subconsciously wanted to take off the bracelet on her hand, but this strange bracelet couldn't be taken off no matter what. She couldn't help but think of what the mysterious black-cloaked man said to her. Hell King, could it be that this bracelet was really a treasure? Chapter 1497. Because the attack happened in the area directly under the jurisdiction of the Magician Association, the association's patrolling guards quickly came over after hearing the news. As the person directly involved, Fontes, his disciple, and Jean Luoyue were taking notes with Captain Lin of the patrol guards. The Divine Realm? Did the person who attacked you really mention the Divine Realm? The captain of the patrol guards suddenly became serious. Master Vic? Of course, I'm not doubting you. It's just that this is a serious matter, so we need to be careful. A high-level pharmacist already had a very high status. Ordinary, inhuman, couldn't come into contact with legendary heroes and witches, so the captain was very polite at this time. "You've done well, my captain." Master Vich nodded with a smile. "However, I can guarantee that the mysterious black-cloaked man mentioned the divine realm before he left. It seems like they really are the remnants of the divine realm." "Captain, did something happen?" The captain nodded and said, "In fact, since the Michael Club invasion last week, those guys seem to have become active. Not only this time, but in the past few days, there have been reports of their traces in different areas." "My God, are these guys planning to do something while the association hasn't settled down yet?" Master Vic couldn't help but frown. Although it wasn't publicized and there was no official explanation, the news of the death of the Mithril Tower's owner had already spread like wildfire. Everyone knew about it. Yes, the threat from the Michael Association hasn't been eliminated yet, and the remaining evil here has started to stir up trouble again. The inhuman domain is really troubled. The captain shook his head. "But no matter what, we still have the invincible First Tower Master, so we don't have to worry about these clowns. These guys seem to be blindly worshipping Elizabeth's teacher." The third lady silently looked at them praising Hui Yao and couldn't help but have a strange feeling. What if this pillar of support is broken? Where's it gone? She was suddenly shocked by her own thoughts at this time, but she hid it well. At least, Fontes, who was beside her, didn't pay too much attention to her subtle changes at this time. By the way, why did that mysterious person attack her in the beginning? The captain suddenly looked at Zhong Luoyue, his eyes filled with doubt. "I'm talking about this young lady." The third young miss thought that this was probably related to the bracelet on her wrist. Just as she was pondering how she should answer, Fontes unexpectedly stood up and said, "It's like this. You may not know, Captain. This is Miss Yu. She is Radiance Pagoda Master's student and Miss Elizabeth's best friend. I think the person who attacked her must have done so because of this. Perhaps he even wanted to kidnap Miss Yu and then hurt Miss Elizabeth before finally dealing a blow to the Radiance Pagoda Master." "I see." Hearing this, the captain's expression changed slightly. "If that's the case, there is indeed such a possibility. How about this? We will escort you all the way back." "Thank you, Captain." Fontes smiled and nodded, then gently looked at Zhong Luoyue. His small eyes seemed to be saying, "Look, no matter what trouble it is, I can solve it for you. Choosing me is definitely the right choice." How could the third miss not guess what this young master meant? However, she really didn't want to attract too much trouble. Thus, with Fontes' interruption and this captain actually following this train of thought, she didn't feel like saying anything else. Speak less and do more before she had the ability to protect herself. Afterwards, everyone chatted for a bit. Finally, the captain had his subordinates stay behind to clean up the scene and brought people to escort them back. Because Fontes' carriage had already been blown up, he and the third young miss directly sat in Master Vic's carriage on the way back. "Don't be afraid. Those remnants shouldn't dare to come again tonight," Master Vic said indifferently. The third young miss took advantage of this suitable time to ask, "Master, may I ask what the remnants you are talking about are?" Master Vic casually said, "Actually, it's not a secret, so it's fine to tell you. These remnants are actually the predecessor of the inhuman domain, the survivors of a ruined Greek god's domain. Back then, our Radiance Tower's owner discovered this place and had the idea of transforming it to create a pure land for all the inhumans. Of course, there were some obstructions in the process. Actually, we tried to communicate with them in the past, hoping to coexist peacefully. And basically all the invaders in human history had this idea." The third young miss didn't express any opinions. "In the beginning, they caused a lot of trouble for us, but it gradually calmed down." Master Vic slowly said, "Later on, these remnants split into two different opinions. One side wanted to coexist peacefully with us and even joined us. You know the Scarlet Flame Tower's owner and the Ice Tower's owner, right? They were the remnants of the divine domain. In fact, there are many areas in the inhuman domain that were created to provide for these original residents. Of course, Most of them are fantasy creatures like demon beasts. The third young miss thought for a bit and said, "Then the other side, are they the ones who attacked us tonight?" Master Vic nodded and said, "The other side has actually disappeared for a long time. Now, it seems that they still haven't given up. Back then, this divine domain was ruined, and the space kept losing. It was clearly on the path to destruction and would be devoured by the void sooner or later. If it wasn't for the Radiance Tower's owner doing everything he could to pick it up and build the current stable system, what divine domain would there be? However, these people don't know how to be grateful. They call themselves the noble god race, and even want to rule us and make us their slaves. What a rotten idea. They are the descendants of the Greek gods." The third young miss frowned. At this moment, Fontes lightly laughed and said, "What descendants of the gods? They are just the descendants of some servants or demigods who lived on the mountain of the gods. It's just that the gods disappeared, and they replaced them, calling themselves the new god race. Yes, the Socius god race. This is what they call themselves after establishing themselves. In the past, they would secretly assassinate some of the big shots of our association to attack us. This time, they ambushed us. They must have had their eyes on you. After all, your relationship with the Radiance Tower's owner isn't shallow. Didn't you hear what the black-robed man said before leaving? This is clearly a new round of provocation to us." Jean Louis knew that Fontes had probably misunderstood something. Even Master Vic, who was beside her, agreed with this misunderstanding. However, she didn't plan to say anything and temporarily let some things rot in her stomach. Inhuman domain. Mysterious area. Even after the Radiance Tower had restored the system of the Greek god's divine domain, there were still some places that couldn't be completely covered. For example, the mysterious crack that existed under the 13 clans' territory. Another example was this huge forest filled with trees. A man wearing a black cloak was rapidly moving through the forest. Not long after, he arrived at the entrance of a karst cave. He went all the way into the cave and went underground. As a member of the Socius god race, this man always wanted to restore the glory of the era of the gods. He wanted to beat the invaders and the traitors to the ground. "O great divine master of darkness, your servant is here to praise you." The man stopped in front of a translucent stone wall in the depths of the karst cave. He could see that inside the stone wall, there seemed to be a huge black shadow. He couldn't see its true appearance. He called it the god of darkness. "Oh, what's the matter that disturbed my rest?" The voice of the shadow inside the stone wall was deep and cold. Accompanying its voice, a whistling cold wind blew in the karst cave. This black-robed man waved his hand. A 40 centimeters long and 30 centimeters wide box appeared in his palm. He opened the box in front of the shadow and saw that there were 6 jade bracelets inside. "My God, these are the keys that my clansmen have recently collected." A gray fireball suddenly condensed in front of the stone wall. Then, the fireball shot out and directly exploded the box. Even the 6 bracelets in the box were blown into pieces. "God?" The black-robed man was shocked. The shadow inside the stone wall said in a deep voice, "Hell King is a weapon made with the purest death energy. The key that activates Hell King must have the same death energy. I can feel this because I once..." "None of this is true. Continue to look for it. You must find it." The black-robed man said, "My God, does Hell King really exist? I'm not doubting you. I just can't imagine what a weapon that could destroy gods looks like. It's normal that you don't know." The shadow inside the stone wall said indifferently, "Without experiencing that era, you can't imagine how terrifying it is. I will never forget that day when Hell King broke through the realm of gods with terrifying power. If it wasn't for the realm of gods being broken through and some powerful beings and creatures fell from the unknown void, the realm of gods wouldn't have been destroyed. Perhaps now, the mountain of gods still exists, but it has changed its name. I feel it. I recently felt a trace of Hell King's aura again. It has appeared again, but the feeling is intermittent and I can't pinpoint its exact location. But one thing is for sure, we must find the key to activate Hell King This will be the key to defeating the Magician Association. My God, I, Mayor Lotta, swear with my life that I will definitely find the key to Hell King. The Black Robe Man, Mayor Lotta said with his head lowered. At this moment, the shadow in the stone wall suddenly trembled, and the whole Kar's cave also trembled. The real world, present world, the aura of Hell King has appeared again. I can feel it, although it's very weak. It's present world. Go, find Hell King for me. As he said that, a crystal shot out from the stone wall. Mayor Lotta stepped forward and held the crystal in his hand. This crystal can lead you to Hell King. This time you can't fail, the shadow said with a deep voice. If it wasn't for this damn seal, I would have personally gone to find it. Mayor Lotta will definitely find Hell King and the key to control Hell King and release my god from this seal. I swear with my life. Mayor Lotta's eyes gradually became fanatical. I really can't open it. Association Radiance Tower Master's private magic tower. Elizabeth's resting area. The third lady didn't hide anything from Elizabeth when she came back. Instead, she told Elizabeth everything that happened that night, only omitting the content of the agreement with Maria. This thing, is it really something from the era of the Greek gods? The third lady looked a little worried. She saw Maria holding the bracelet for a while, and nothing happened, so she directly picked it up. She didn't expect that after wearing it on her wrist, she couldn't take it off. The vampire girl took a magnifying glass and carefully looked at the pattern on the bracelet. There seems to be something written on it. It seems to be some kind of text. I think I've seen it somewhere. Where? The third lady quickly asked. It seems to be in teacher's library. Elizabeth thought for a moment before bringing Jean Luoyue into the library. She then started flipping through the piles of books. These were the precious books that Elizabeth had finished reading during this period of time. This child is really attentive. She is so attentive to chase after him. Women who are impulsive for love can erupt with terrible effort. Jean Luoyue shook her head inwardly, thinking that she would never do such things for a man in her life. She would only work so hard for herself, to make herself more outstanding. Found it. Just when the third lady was secretly distracted, the vampire girl cried out in surprise. At this time, she was holding a big book that was half her height on a mountain of books. Then she spread her small palm-sized wings and slowly flew down. This is the text. This bracelet is engraved with the text of the Titan gods. The Titan gods were the gods who ruled the world before the Greek gods. Does Cronus know? He is the lord of the sky and the Greek gods, the father of Hades and the Sea King. He is the king of the Titan gods. The third lady glanced at the pile of miscellaneous books. Thinking that she would have to make a living in the inhuman domain in the future, it seemed that she really needed to cram some knowledge. She shook her head and said, "Can you decipher the text engraved on this bracelet?" The vampire girl immediately opened the book that was half her height and flipped through the pages as if she was looking up a dictionary. Jean Luoyue silently counted the time, feeling uneasy in her heart. It was not until late at night that the vampire girl yawned and looked up at Jean Luoyue and said, I have translated it. What did it say? Jean Luoyue quickly asked. Elizabeth thought for a while and said, "It seems to be a name engraved on it. Poulin Hades." Poulin Hades? Jean Luoyue frowned, raised the bracelet in her hand, and read it again. Nothing happened. Chapter 1498. After half a night, she finally managed to translate the text, but she did not expect that it was just a name. Poulin Hades. Although this name was crowned with the name of Hades, one of the Greek gods, when Jean Luoyue read the name, the bracelet did not change at all. Why, Elizabeth, can you teach me the correct pronunciation of these words? Jean Luoyue suddenly asked. Perhaps in another way, translating the content was not enough. The important thing was to know the correct pronunciation. This was also the power of language that some of the ancient wizards in the association worshipped. They believed that ancient words contained great power. But the vampire girl said that she could only find the meaning of these words based on the appearance of these words in the book, and this book did not have any similar pronunciation notes. Is there no other way? Jean Luoyue looked at the bracelet that could not be taken off. If this thing could not be taken off, it was not a particularly troublesome matter. It was just that it was not easy to match when wearing clothes. But matching clothes was a small matter. The key was that this thing seemed to attract the attack of the Socius gods. Third Miss did not want to put herself in such a dangerous position. Maybe I can ask teacher tomorrow. While Elizabeth thought at this time and said, this book about the study of the Titan language was written by teacher himself. He may know the reading of the Titan language. Maybe about the bracelet, we could talk to teacher directly. This was not a bad idea, or rather, this was the best way. Or, you can first figure out the reading of the Titan language. Jean Luoyue shook her head. The master of the Radiance Tower is very busy. I don't want to disturb him because of this small matter. If we really have no way to solve the problem, how about we go to him? Of course, there's still many capable masters in the association. I can ask them how to open this bracelet tomorrow. Most importantly, it was going to be dawn soon. Jean Luoyue was really sleepy at this time. She was not like Elizabeth, who was just a newborn vampire. She was supposed to undergo her first transformation in the 13 clans, but in the end, it was ruined by the rebellion of the Golden Dragon Fafnir. Jean Luoyue naturally transformed on the first day she came to the association. The result was obvious. She didn't have a good foundation, so her transformation wasn't ideal. That was why her potential was determined to be average. In short, she was still a weak vampire, so she couldn't resist the sleepiness brought by the day. Okay, I'm a little sleepy too. I read a lot of books today. Elizabeth then said goodbye to Jean Luoyue and returned to her coffin. Jean Luoyue sneaked a peek at the little girl's coffin. The design of the coffin was actually similar to hers. They were all prepared by the people inside the association. But unlike the simplicity of his own coffin, the interior of Elizabeth's coffin was obviously much more girly. Most importantly, there was a large pillow inside, and there was a crooked human face embroidered on the pillow. Naturally, there was no need to say who this human face belonged to. Brother Luochio, good night. Elizabeth's soft voice faintly came from the closed coffin. Jean Luoyue shook her head and climbed into the coffin herself. A new day soon came in the inhuman domain. Some people had already woken up to work, but some had just fallen asleep. The third young lady had a dream. She dreamed that she had become a giant beast. The giant beast had a huge body, as huge as the Titans recorded in the ancient books. It tore the sky, crushed the earth, and even broke through the world. Outside the broken world, there was a void. Then, a large number of monsters poured in through the gap in the world. The monsters crazily tore and bit the creatures on the ground, and even flew towards the giant beast. She, who had turned into a giant beast, immediately fought with these monsters. They kept fighting and killing, as if there was no end. Finally, all the creatures on the ground seemed to have died. Blood covered the ground, and gray snow fell from the sky. Then the sky cracked open. The world also cracked open. It was as if there was only death left in the surroundings. Everything was silent. Why didn't I see your little tail today? There was no Poulin's class in the morning class. There were a total of 2 slightly boring theory classes in the morning. The classes in the School of Theology were already boring. As a result, after 2 classes, most of the students in the class had fallen asleep in the snow. The teacher did not care about it. When the bell rang, he directly walked out of the classroom. At this time, Claudia walked quickly to Luochio's side and sat down. Little tail? Boss Luo blinked. That girl. Claudia shrugged and said, she always follows behind you. Isn't she like a tail? Boss Luo smiled. He could not tell Claudia that Miss Maid was now in another world. She has something to do, so she asked for leave for a few days. She asked for leave on her second day here. What kind of gods are you? Claudia smiled bitterly. After leaving the Butterfly Society yesterday, she went to check it out of curiosity. She found out that this society was actually established the day before yesterday, and it was officially launched yesterday. That was not all. The most important thing was that it was so exquisitely decorated in such a short time. It made Claudia wonder if the 2 freshmen's family sold oil. Why are you looking for me? Boss Luo did not care about Claudia's guess at this time. He asked while packing up the textbooks. Claudia frowned, lowered her voice, and asked rather anxiously, "What happened yesterday?" "Well, Miss Claudia, it's already lunchtime." Boss Luo smiled and said, "Why don't we talk about this in my department? I think we need a quieter environment." Claudia heard this and nodded at first. Then, she carefully covered her chest with her textbooks and said, "We can only talk about business. I'm not interested in anything else. Also, you're not my type." Isn't it better to talk in a quieter place?" Boss Luo thought about it. "I didn't seem to have said anything out of line, right?" "Don't worry." Luochio shook his head and said, "I don't have any romantic thoughts about Miss Claudia. I'm just interested in the background behind this matter." "That's good." Claudia nodded. "I just want to study hard in university. I don't want to waste time on boring hormones." "Then this way, please. Let's go to the Butterfly Society." Boss Luo smiled and walked in front as if he was leading the way for her. Claudia watched Luochio walk away and hurriedly pushed her glasses up. Then, she took a deep breath and hugged her textbooks tightly in front of her chest. Then, she lowered her head and hurriedly followed. To be honest, she had never had the chance to be alone with a male of her age. "Wait for me," Claudia hurriedly called out. At this time, something flashed by the corridor outside the window. Claudia subconsciously looked at it. It seemed to be a black cat. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me? Butterfly Society. After opening the window on the upper floor of the old school building, one could see a small man-made forest in front of them. The old school building was surrounded by the shade of the trees. It was quite quiet and cool. Claudia sat on the sofa, more reserved than yesterday. Luochio was personally making tea for her. "I don't usually make these, so the taste might not be very good." Luochio smiled and said, "Please don't mind." Claudia always felt that she was definitely the iron virgin that her classmates talked about. Not only was she not interested in men and women, but she also rejected all kinds of celebrity-chasing activities. Compared to the popular supermodels, she obviously felt that the mathematics professors were more handsome and charming. But at this time, she had to admit that this new student from the East had a very nice smile. In her heart, she temporarily crossed out the conjectures about Luochio, such as nouveau riche son, playboy who only knows how to play. He may have more women than he reads, and so on, leaving a comprehensive impression of the guy with a good-looking smile. "Let's get back to business." Claudia pushed her glasses and looked out of the window. She said, "Don't waste time on drinking tea. Actually, water is better. Clear water is the source of life." Boss Luo smiled. He had always been used to drinking clear water, but later he became used to drinking tea. Someone said that it only took 3 days to get used to something like this. He must have let Miss Maid get used to it by far more than this number. "Miss Claudia," Luochio thought at this time and said, "I don't know. Have you ever thought of going to the place where your father, Professor Siegeru, inspected?" Claudia frowned. "You mean my father's disappearance is really related to his research project?" Luochio shook his head and said, "I don't recommend using a definite tone now, Miss Claudia. I mean, maybe we can find some clues there." Claudia thought about it and said, "Actually, I have thought about this before, but the problem is I don't know where my father and his team went to investigate. I've looked through all the information in his office, but I still can't find any clues." Luochio said, "About the inspection location, I have found it." "What?" Claudia was shocked. She slapped the table and stood up. "You found it? How did you find it?" Luochio said, "Actually, according to normal means, as long as you investigate the information of your father's entry and exit, it is easy to find it, isn't it?" "You are right." Claudia's frown deepened. "That's usually the case, but the police have already investigated this. But they couldn't find any information about my father. So, I suspect that my father may have used a fake passport to enter and leave the country." "So how did you do it? Even the police can't do it?" Luochio suddenly said, "Miss Claudia, do you think we are very mysterious?" Claudia nodded without thinking and said bluntly, "You give me the feeling that you are not ordinary people. You are indeed very mysterious. You even did something that the police couldn't do for half a year in one night. So, where did you come from?" "Mysterious is right." Luochio smiled and said, Your father, Professor Siedu, also mysteriously disappeared. And now, you found us mysterious to investigate this matter, making everything seem confusing. Miss Claudia, don't you think this is a great experience? Then, when I have half a foot in the coffin, I can program this matter into a fantasy story to deceive my little granddaughter or grandson who has just become interested in mysterious matters, right? Claudia suddenly rolled her eyes. I can't say for the time being whether you are mysterious or not, but I can be sure of one thing now. You are very likely crazy. Are you relaxed now? Luaccio picked up a cube of sugar and put it into Claudia's cup. At this moment, this student Claudia had clearly forgotten his initial restraint. Rolling his eyes and looking annoyed, he appeared to be very energetic and natural. Claudia opened her mouth, but in the end, she shook her head and sat down again. Can you tell me how you got the information? Business secret. I can't tell you for the time being. Luaccio shook his head. Claudia rolled her eyes again. Then you can at least tell me where my father went for the postgraduate entrance exam, right? Luaccio said softly. Egypt. Claudia opened his mouth, then gritted his teeth and stood up abruptly. Wait a minute. I'll go out for a while. What's the matter? Boss Luo asked, puzzled. Claudia said directly. I'm going to ask for leave now, since it's so far away in Egypt. Do you think we can go back and forth in a day? Without waiting for Luaccio's response, Claudia rushed out of the door of the Butterfly Society. She was the type to act quickly. Luaccio smiled and walked to the window with the teacup, looking at the small forest outside the old-school building. The place further away was actually a cliff, and further away from the cliff was the sea. Luaccio didn't intend to put Claudia's matter aside or ignore it because of Nero's sudden disappearance. Nero's disappearance might be some information about his future self. In the end, Claudia's matter was also related to Golden Pupil, the person who translated the message left behind by the previous owner of the shop. The previous owner. Past. Luaccio whispered to himself. Future me. Future, current me. Present. Trinity? At this moment, the sea in the distance suddenly dimmed a little. Boss Luo looked at it and suddenly closed the window. The sea suddenly dimmed, but it quickly returned to its original state. At this time, a figure appeared on the sea. It was a man wearing a black cloak and holding a gray crystal in his hand, Mylada. Feeling the information from the gray crystal, Mylada moved his gaze and finally locked his eyes on the seaside town in front of him. Is it here? Pluto. Hashtag PS 154th. Chapter 1499. He looked around the sea and saw an island near the shore. He quickly landed on the island. Then, Mylada threw out the coordinates of the inhuman domain. Of course, these were the illegal coordinates that he bought from the black market. As the coordinates were opened, people wearing black robes walked out of the whirlpool one after another. They were the core members of the Socius God clan and had the same ideals as Mylada. There were a total of 3 Socius God clan members who came out. Mylada looked at the arrival of his 3 companions and said in a low voice, "The crystal given by the Lord of Gods has shown the location. The target should be in the small town in front." One of the God clan members suddenly asked in confusion, "This is the modern world. Why would Pluto appear here?" Mylada thought for a while and said, "When Pluto appeared, he ended the war between the gods and broke the divine realm. The divine realm was split, and the sea, land, and Hades that used to be there are still missing. Later, when the beasts invaded, the broken divine realm was even worse. However, Pluto disappeared. Perhaps, when the divine realm was broken, Pluto fell into the modern world for some reason. This was the only possibility that Mylada could think of. Just like what the shadow and the stone wall said, he didn't really experience the war of the gods. He was only a descendant of the survivors of the war and was only trying to restore the glory of his ancestors. As the descendant of Ares, the great god of war of the ancient Greek gods, how could he let himself be mediocre? It took him a lot of effort to find the cave through various means and clues. He found the shadow sealed in the stone wall under the cave, a god who had survived the generations of the gods, a real god. The god of darkness promised him that when he helped him escape from the stone wall, he would be able to activate the bloodline of the god of war's ancestors and become a new god of war. A great god. That's right, finding Pluto is the most important thing. The members of the Socius god clan nodded and were about to move. However, Mylata suddenly waved his hand, turned around, and said indifferently, "It seems that we have just arrived in the afterlife, and there is already someone who welcomes us. Are you not going to come out?" At this moment, Mylata was facing an enormous reef at the edge of the island. His voice was low and deep. After waiting quietly for a moment, he didn't see any movement. Mylata coldly snorted and waved his hand. A strong light suddenly shot out and instantly blasted the huge reef in front of him into pieces. 3 beautiful naked women were currently hugging each other in extreme terror. Clearly, they were greatly frightened. "This is a siren." A soft god frowned when he saw the peculiar features of the 3 naked women. "There are sirens in the modern realm?" Mylata shook his head and said with a cold gaze, "I don't know. Perhaps they're the descendants of the sirens who secretly escaped here during the Great War of the Age of the Gods. Looking at them, they should not have reached adulthood yet. What should we do with them?" Mylata thought for a moment and said, "Legend has it that the ancestors of the sirens were once the maids of the queen of the underworld. Come to think of it, these sirens can be considered as collateral relatives of the Soth God clan. Let's capture them first. When we take back the divine realm, we will grant them official identities of the Soth God clan. We need our own people." "Understood." A Soth god nodded and immediately walked quickly towards the 3 siren sisters who were curled up in fear. They didn't even know where the 4 black-robed men came from. At this moment, when they saw one of them walking towards them, they instinctively felt danger. This reminded them of the time when their parents were killed by monster hunters and they were chased all the way. They couldn't help but feel terrified. At this time, the 3 sirens screamed in horror. This was the most powerful weapon of the underage sirens, the voice that could confuse humans. Quite energetic, but unfortunately, you are not an adult yet. The Soth god who walked towards them chuckled. "This little bit of charming voice is useless to me. Give up resistance. We are not your enemies. We will be your companions. Don't come over. We don't know you." They retreated a little in fear and wanted to dive back into the sea, but unexpectedly, the way was blocked by another Soth god clan member. They could only be trapped in the ditch of the reef, not knowing what to do. "What poor children." The Soth god clan member shook his head. "The ancestors of the sirens were of noble blood, but I didn't expect the descendants of the sirens to be reduced to this. Come, child, come into our arms." The youngest siren suddenly opened her mouth and shot a water arrow directly at the Soth god clan member. The water arrow did not hurt him, but it cut his clothes. "I like energetic children." The Soth god clan member whose clothes were cut sneered and suddenly reached out and grabbed the little siren who spat the water arrow. He held the little siren's throat and smiled even wider. "Because energetic children are more interesting when trained. From now on, you are under my care. I will teach you to be an excellent warrior. Let me go. Let me go." The frightened little siren could only struggle at this time. The Soth god clan member shook his head and said, "You are too weak. You should eat human flesh. Human flesh is the source of your power. Especially you, from now on, eat at least 3 human beings every day." I don't want to. Mr. Poulin will be angry. Let me go." The little siren sobbed and said, "Let me go." "Mr. Poulin will not let you go." "Mr. Poulin?" The Soth god clan member was suddenly curious. "Who is this? Is he also a siren? Or is he your elder?" At this moment, the little siren tightly pursed her mouth. Under the stern gazes of her 2 sisters, the little siren suddenly realized that she shouldn't have said Mr. Prin's name. "Humph, you don't want to say?" The Soth god clan member who caught the little siren sneered. "What a disobedient child. I don't mind disciplining you from now on. I will let you know that children should listen to their elders." He still held the little siren's neck tightly and lifted her up high. The other two sirens were filled with grief and indignation, and their faces were full of hatred. They wanted to save the little siren, but they were directly pressed to the ground by another Soth God clan member. Be quiet. If you are disobedient, you will be next. The two sirens could only watch in despair as their youngest sister hovered between life and death. Still don't want to say it? Then I'll have to use more strength. The Soth God clan member who caught the little siren snorted, but at this time, a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed his arm. He was surprised to find that the one who grabbed his arm was one of the leaders, Mylada. Mylada said indifferently, "They will be the children of the God clan in the future. You can be strict, but don't go too far. It doesn't matter who Poulin is. Don't forget our purpose this time. Don't make trouble for me." "Okay." He shrugged, loosened his hand, and threw the little siren back to her sisters. He sneered at her and said, "From now on, I will adopt you, little one." At this time, a gray light ball suddenly appeared above the heads of Mylada and the three Soth gods. The sudden appearance of the gray light ball instantly attracted their attention. The ball of light began to slowly descend at an extremely slow speed. Mylada and his companions couldn't help but watch in confusion. But just as the ball of light was about to hit the ground, Mylada was suddenly startled. He loudly shouted, "Scatter!" Boom! The gray light ball that fell to the ground expanded in an instant. After expanding, it directly swallowed the reefs of the island, creating a huge pit with a diameter of nearly 10 meters. Mylada and his companions dodged in time, but they were also affected by the impact. The Soth God clan member who had threatened to adopt the little siren, his black robe was completely eroded, and his body was completely exposed. He was a monster with a human body and a snake tail. His gray skin was covered with spots, and his face was ugly. It seems that he is a descendant of Ikarna, but I don't know which descendant left his bloodline. But if he wants to adopt the three of them, his weak bloodline is not enough. An indifferent voice suddenly came. The Soth God clan member who had been exposed looked at the source of the voice. He saw a man in a black suit, with a top hat covering his eyes and nose, and his hands clasped behind his back. Soth, who had a human body and a snake tail, snorted coldly. "Sneaky, deceiving fellow, are you the Mr. Poulin these little sirens are talking about?" Unexpectedly, the man in the black suit shook his head and didn't speak. "I don't care who you are. Don't pretend to be mysterious in front of me." The Soth God with a human body and a snake tail snorted coldly. Suddenly, his neck stretched out. His head reached in front of the man in the black suit. "I don't like living things approaching me." The man in the black suit shook his head slightly. The head that stretched out. The head's ferocious face suddenly froze, completely froze. His body also became motionless. The strange appearance of this Soth God with a human body and a snake tail caused the expressions of his companions to change. Mylada frowned. Just as he was about to attack, this Soth God with a human body and a snake tail suddenly turned into black ashes. Mylada turned pale with fright, and almost without any consideration, he instinctively jumped off the island and crashed into the sea. He didn't even care about the reactions of his other two companions. At this time, seeing Mylada escape without hesitation, the two Soth gods looked at each other and tacitly fled in two different directions. Unfortunately, they were half a step slower. The moment they moved, two huge shadow arms stretched out from the ground and directly grabbed them. Finally, the shadow arms dragged the two Soth gods into the ground and disappeared. At this time, the sea water was hitting the reef on the shore, and the water splashed on the faces of the three sirens. They woke up from their absent-mindedness and looked at the man in the black suit with respect and fear. More of it was fear. "It's all right." The man in the black suit turned around. "But you will encounter other troubles one day if you live here. Go to the depths of the sea, the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean, where you can live." "Please wait a minute." The man in the black suit was about to leave, but the youngest siren hurriedly stopped him. "Are you Mr. Poulin?" He didn't stop, and his voice gradually faded away. "I'm not the Poulin, you know." The black suit had disappeared. The little siren was puzzled at this time. She looked at her two sisters and said subconsciously, "But I saw. This is clearly Mr. Poolin's appearance. What should we do now?" The second sister of the three sirens frowned. Obviously, she didn't consider the third sister's question. The eldest siren frowned and finally gritted her teeth. "That man said that there is a suitable place for us to live in the depths of the sea. Should we go and have a look? Can we trust him?" The second sister hesitated. The eldest sister looked around and smiled bitterly. "That man doesn't need to lie to us. Those four mysterious guys are no match for him. If he wants to hurt us, we can't resist at all." Well, let's go to the place," he said. The second sister finally agreed, and then patted the third sister's head. "Don't think too much. He is not Mr. Poolin. You are wrong." "Is that so?" The third sister couldn't help but show a puzzled expression. She looked at her eldest sister and found that her eldest sister also nodded. She couldn't help but rub her head, wondering if she was wrong. "Then, let's go now." The eldest sister made a prompt decision. "There is another guy who escaped. I don't know if he will come back. We can't stay here anymore." "Wait." The third sister hurriedly said, "I want to leave a message for Mr. Poolin, saying that we are leaving here. After all, he has taken care of us for so long." "Well, but hurry up." The eldest sister was soft-hearted and agreed. Looking at the small stone carving a picture on the reef, the eldest sister and the second sister suddenly looked at each other. The second sister whispered, "Eldest sister, actually I also saw." The eldest sister shook her head, reached out and covered the second sister's mouth, and said seriously, "You are all wrong." Soon after, the three sirens dived into the sea. They would go through a long journey and finally go to a mysterious place, the depths of the sea. Under the waves, under a cliff at the edge of the sea, a figure fled into the cave at the bottom of the cliff. Mayor Lotta gasped for breath, recalling that horrible scene, and his heart couldn't help beating fast. Suddenly, he touched the gray crystal hidden in his clothes, the tool given by the god of darkness to find the final weapon, Pluto. At this moment, inside the gray crystal, a trace of starlight suddenly lit up. The crystal reacted. Could it be? Mayor Lotta frowned. Is it? In a room that was airtight, a man in a black suit sat quietly on a chair in front of the fireplace. He closed his eyes and seemed to have fallen asleep. Suddenly, a very slight sound came from the room. It turned out to be a black cat that had come in from somewhere. The black cat gently jumped into the man's arms. Lying there, it also fell asleep quietly. Chapter 1500. As night fell, Luaccio walked alone on the streets of the town. Suddenly, he found that he didn't seem to be in a hurry to go back to the manor. In fact, he didn't need to go anywhere in the past. It was just because Ms. Maid was temporarily away, and Taisetsu was also in the dimensional gap. Nero was also gone. Only Luoya, who was asleep more than awake, was left. In the manor, the only one awake was probably the artificial intelligence, Eve, left by Ms. Maid to deal with daily chores. Ramama was not even in this foreign country. Luaccio found that he was not in a hurry to go back, because there was no one waiting for him in the manor. The manor was Ms. Maid's property. Taisetsu and Nero even cleaned the manor very well. It was spacious, bright, quiet, and comfortable, but it was not a home for the time being. When he passed by Mr. Smith's restaurant, it was still closed. It seemed that Mr. Smith was still in the hospital accompanying his wife who had not passed the critical period in the observation room. Someone greeted Boss Luo in front of Mr. Smith's restaurant. He should be a regular customer of the restaurant. But obviously, for Luaccio, he was just a stranger who met for the first time. He might also regard Luaccio as a regular customer here. The residents of the town seemed to be so enthusiastic. Perhaps it was because the town was not big. In fact, everyone knew each other. Rather than saying that they lived in the same city, it was better to say that they were neighbors. This old customer who was loitering in front of the restaurant was probably unhappy that he couldn't eat Mr. Smith's dishes today. He finally caught a person who stopped at the restaurant's entrance and invited him to eat without hesitation. "Hey, brother, are you interested in having a drink with me? It's my treat." Boss Luo glanced at the old man and the Scottish skirt he was wearing. In the end, he politely declined. "Sorry, sir, someone is waiting for me at home." Huh, good. The old man in the skirt didn't mind. Instead, he said with more appreciation, "You really should cherish your family. Believe me, young man, this is the most correct thing in the world. Among the things you regret in the future, there will definitely be this one, that you didn't accompany your family well. God bless you." Boss Luo nodded at the old man in a little skirt. Boss Luo engraved this insight from life into his heart and softly said to the old man, "I wish you well too." The old man probably couldn't tell the true meaning of the sentence, "I wish you well too." He probably thought that it also meant, "God bless you." Or maybe it just meant that, but he went away in an obviously cheerful mood. Boss Luo left the restaurant and continued strolling through the streets of the town. He thought of Rin Xiling, so he picked up his phone. After thinking for a while, he sent a message, "Remember to have lunch." However, in an instant, Nanny Run, who was 7 time zones away, immediately replied with a long message. Luochio lowered his head and read carefully. Between the lines, he seemed to gradually hear her voice. Then, he stopped because a group of people were blocking his way. To be precise, the people blocking the road didn't deliberately block anyone's way. They were just a group of curious passers-by who gathered together to watch the show. Boss Luo put away his phone and glanced at it. He really found 2 young Asian people eating watermelon while watching. The passers-by gathered in a group and watched what seemed to be a fight. Many people even raised their phones to film and upload. In fact, the fight was already over. In the crowd, a bald man wearing a black robe. He was supposed to be wearing a hoodie, but for some reason, his hood was lifted. At this time, he stretched out his hand and grabbed a young man's collar, lifting the young man up with one hand. There were a few motionless guys lying on the ground. They were probably the young man's friends. Looking at such a scene, it was easy to think of such a story. A few youngsters who had nothing to do after eating their fill wanted to have some fun. At this time, they suddenly encountered a funny guy wearing a black robe and covering his face as he walked on the street. The youngsters who were too bored walked up to provoke him and even took off his hood. A few brothers who thought that they were kings were killed by the bald old man who thought that they were bronze ranked in a short while, and so on. That was how the current scene came to be. That's right, there was a scorpion-like tattoo on the bald head of this black-robed old man. I was wrong, let me go. Please let me go. I'm sorry, I'm just a kid." The young man who was lifted up begged for mercy in horror at this time. No one knew whose kid he was, but someone in the crowd recognized him. The impression of the town people were more enthusiastic was once again displayed in front of Boss Luo. It was the old man in a dress who talked a lot in front of the restaurant. He pushed the crowd and walked out. "Hey, buddy." The old man in a dress stretched out his hand and directly put it on the shoulder of the bald old man in a black robe. "Listen to me. You really don't need to care about such a kid. If they really offended you, then you have already taught them a lesson. Believe me, if this continues, it won't be a pleasant thing. How about I treat you to a drink?" When the bald uncle in black heard this, he expressionlessly threw the young man who was lifted up high to the ground. After the young man landed on the ground, he immediately kicked his legs to make his body move quickly. He moved to his companion, who couldn't get up from the ground. It seemed that even if he had thought of escaping, he didn't want to abandon his companion for the time being. But no matter how he shook, his companion lying on the ground couldn't be woken up. "Kid, call an ambulance." The old man in a dress frowned at this time, then glanced at the bald old man. After pondering for a while, he directly grabbed the bald old man's arm and said with regret, "Sorry, buddy. I think I can't treat you to a drink for the time being. You may have hit a little too hard. You see, these kids have all fainted because of you. Believe me, I know these kids. Although they are a little naughty, I often beat them. But I don't beat them so hard. You have already committed a crime." The bald man in the black robe finally showed some expression on his face. He sneered and shook off the old man's hand with a flip of his hand. Then he grabbed the old man's wrist. "No one can convict me of a crime. Lowly human." "What?" The old man in the little dress was startled when he heard this. He looked at his wrist that was tightly gripped and blinked his eyes subconsciously. Then he frowned. His forehead slammed forward and directly hit the bald man's nose. Oh, this kind of hit looked very painful at first glance. Gasps of cold air could be heard from the crowd. The bald man in a black robe showed a look of disbelief at this time. He was probably a little stunned by the old man's head, but a little nosebleed came out of his nose. The bald man subconsciously reached out and touched his nose. Looking at the blood on his fingertips, anger flashed in his eyes. He suppressed and said in a low voice, "Ignorant mortal, how dare you?" Oh! Unexpectedly, the old man in a dress also seemed to have a bad temper. At this time, he hit the bald man with his head again. "Are you awake, buddy? If not, I don't mind giving you a few more hits." "Ew. You're courting death." The bald man in a black robe made a cold voice at this time. He suddenly stretched out his hand and opened his palm, facing the old man in a dress. "Under the burning of the scorching sun, repent your crimes." "Mortal." When the old man in the little dress heard this, his heart skipped a beat. It was as if he had felt an unprecedented fear at that moment. However, he blinked his eyes, and nothing happened. Indeed, nothing happened. Only this bald man in a black robe stretched out his 5 fingers, and in the crowd, seriously, said quickly, as if he was acting awkwardly, "I'm the descendant of the great god of war, Ares. Fire between heaven and earth. Punish the ignorant mortal in front of me for me." The bald man in a black robe opened his 5 fingers again, and then pushed forward. Nothing happened. "Brave soldiers of ancient times, I summon you in the name of the descendant of Ares, the god of war, to destroy the sinner in front of me." At this time, his left hand grabbed the wrist of his right hand, and the 5 fingers of his right hand opened again and pushed forward fiercely. Nothing happened, containing the divine power of the ancient gods. Oh! The old man in a dress probably couldn't stand it anymore, and this time, he was too lazy to use a hammer. He came up with a normal uppercut and directly hit the bald man in the abdomen. Although this old man in a dress was a little old, the exposed thighs of the dress were very muscular and clearly had a long-term habit of exercising. The strength of this punch was probably not small. God of war, right? Ancient soldiers, right? Divine power, right? The old man in a dress directly strangled the bald man in a black robe by the neck with one hand and pressed his body down and beat the bald man with punch after punch, until finally the bald man in a black robe was beaten to the ground and saw stars and looked like he couldn't get up even if he wanted to. Only then did the old man tidy up his somewhat messy dress and clothes and snorted, "Psycho." Later, the ambulance came and carried away the unconscious young people. Then, the town's patrol came and handcuffed the bald man in a black robe and took him to the police car. The crowd gradually dispersed because there was nothing worth watching. Life was like this, things that were worth stopping for happen all the time, but it was very short. If it wasn't someone you cared about, who would be willing to stop for a night? Little brat, don't cause trouble for me in the future. If you have nothing to do, study properly, and don't wander around the streets at night. The old man in a dress was now teaching the only young man who hadn't fainted and snorted. In the past, your father wasn't as naughty as you. At this time, he didn't dare to talk back and could only nod submissively. Let's go. Follow to the police station to record a statement. I will accompany you. Don't be afraid. But you need to tell him the whole story once. You can't be vague about what you're supposed to do. I won't side with you. I know. Later, the patrol came and politely invited the old man in a dress into the police car. It turned out that this old man used to be a police officer in the town, but he had retired. He used to be their senior. It was said that he used to have a bad temper, but he also had a nickname, Good Neighbor Uncle Pick. After the police car left, the 2 young Asian men who were eating watermelons also left. Boss Luo walked to the scene of the incident and waved his hand. Suddenly, something slowly rose from the sewer cover next to him. It was a gray crystal. The crystal probably fell into the sewer at some point. Holding this crystal, Luochio blinked and looked at it, then waved his hand as if nothing had happened and slowly disappeared from the streets of the town at night. Name! Say something. The bald man in the black robe sat silently in the office of the town's police station. He stared at the people around him, especially the old man in the little dress who knocked him to the ground. Uncle Pick, known as Good Neighbor Uncle Pick. These people were calling Uncle Pick Grandpa, or Grandpa with great enthusiasm. However, the bald man in the black robe was now secretly suspecting that this Uncle Pick in the kilt was a powerful old wizard hidden in the modern world. Otherwise, he would not have been hit so easily. It must be so. The bald man was frantically trying to recall what had happened when he encountered Uncle Pick. He suspected that this unknown, powerful old mage had secretly done something to him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become so weak. He found that he could not use the divine power left in his descendants by the great god of war Ares. His steel-like body was actually bleeding from the old mage's fists. Not only that, he could not even summon the souls of the ancient soldiers to fight for him. He had become the most ordinary of mortals. In fact, even the protection that the divine master of darkness had given him didn't have any effect at all. This modern world was too terrifying. At this moment, the police could not get any answers, so they could only look at Uncle Pick helplessly. Uncle Pick shook his head, sat in front of the bald man in a black robe, and said in a deep voice, "Tell me your name, address, and contact information." The bald man in a black robe was silent for a moment. Then he slowly said, "Honorable human powerhouse, forgive my rudeness. May I ask, who are you?" Uncle Pick. Chapter 1501. I am Merida. I am a descendant of the great god of war, Ares. Human, how dare you imprison me? Human, do you hear me? Let me out. Let me out. In a guardhouse, Merida grabbed the iron bars with both hands and slammed them madly. No one cared about his craziness. Apart from one on duty, the rest of the police officers were pulled over by Uncle Pick for sponsor partnerships. The police officer's judgment of the suspect was that he was a lunatic who was addicted to virtual reality games and fantasized that he was a superhuman with superpowers. Therefore, after listening to Uncle Pick's opinion, the current police chief decisively imprisoned Merida temporarily and tried to contact his family. Then, he went to have sponsored partnerships with Uncle Pick. Mealtime passed early. Seeing that there was nothing else to do, the police officers on duty also started to have sponsor partnerships after the takeout hamburgers arrived. In the dimly lit corridors of the prison, beast-like roars could be heard from time to time. "Let me out. Stupid mortals. I am. Don't disturb my meal." Bang. Once the doors of the corridor closed, it became much quieter. The police officers on duty ate several layers of sandwiches and sent them out. Happily. It was impossible to let him go, at least not for the time being. News from the hospital said that the teenagers who were sent to the hospital were seriously injured and had yet to wake up. This lunatic was probably going to be sentenced. As for why Merida was so crazy, it was very likely that it was because he had suddenly lost all his powers and became an ordinary person that even Uncle Pick couldn't beat. Therefore, he couldn't get over himself and lost his mind. How is that possible? Today's sandwiches are still very good. In the small-town hospital, not only the medical staff, but also most of the patients were wearing masks. Because for the whole day, the hospital was filled with an extremely pungent stench. It smelled like rotting rat corpses in the sewers. However, the engineer who was hired to check the ventilation system couldn't find the source of the stench after a careful inspection. Under such a troublesome situation, the town's hospital could only endure the stench for the time being and operate as usual. Although it was said to be operating as usual, in fact, many patients who came from minor ailments chose to leave in the end. The corridors were very quiet. A nurse wearing 2 layers of disinfectant masks slowly pushed a cart filled with medicine. She was going to deliver the medicine to the hospitalized patients. Obviously, in such an environment, the work efficiency was greatly affected. However, when the nurse came to the ward, she was surprised to see that there were still people who could endure the stench. There were several of them. Furthermore, they were all elderly. The nurse would often deliver medicine to them, so she knew the condition of these elderly people very well. Their bodies were getting worse and worse. Now, they could only rely on the stimulation of medicine to temporarily rejuvenate the last of their energy. If they did not wait for the surgery or new medical technology that they needed, these elderly people's lives would come to an end. Are you sure you don't feel uncomfortable at all? Do you need me to open the window for you? The nurse walked to an old woman's window and whispered, "The air here is too stuffy. You should breathe more fresh air for your illness." "No, I don't feel stuffy." She had been lying in bed for 3 months. Now, the number of times her children came to visit her had changed from daily to once a week. The old lady shook her head. "I don't feel any strange smell. It's good that it's like this now. It makes me feel more comfortable." Comfortable? The nurse secretly shook her head and suddenly had a strange idea. That was this strange smell seemed to be very suitable for these patients who were about to die. It was as if the smell of death was actually emitted from their bodies. Of course, this was just a subconscious thought, and it couldn't be taken seriously. The nurse was also secretly shocked by her own thoughts. As a medical staff, they had to take an oath when they joined the team, and this was a violation of her previous oath. "I'd better open the window for you. It's too stuffy here." The nurse shook her head. "Besides, you should take your medicine." The strange thing was that the old woman who didn't like to take medicine just quietly watched the nurse open the window. The nurse suddenly felt a chill behind her. She couldn't help but shiver. She turned around but saw nothing. She only saw the old woman lying down and covered with the quilt. What did she lie down? She was supposed to be sitting up, leaning against the headboard while talking to him. For some reason, the nurse suddenly felt a little flustered. She quickly put down the pills and hurriedly gave a few words of advice. Then, she quickly pushed the trolley and left the ward. Even though she knew that this method was completely against the professional ethics of a medical staff. It was really weird. For the whole day, the whole hospital seemed to be filled with this weird atmosphere. Especially the lights on the ceiling of the hospital corridor. At this time, they suddenly flickered, making people feel more and more uncomfortable. The voltage is unstable. "I'll find an electrician instead," the nurse thought to herself. In fact, the electrician had checked and repaired several times for this situation, but every time he couldn't find the right one. These lights would soon return to their current unstable state again. The strange atmosphere seemed to be getting thicker and thicker. The nurse pushed the stretcher trolley alone and walked carefully in the corridor. She didn't know what she was afraid of. This kind of fear even gave her goosebumps, making it difficult for her to keep calm. There was a flash and then darkness. The corridor of the hospital suddenly turned completely dark. The nurse raised her voice. The lights dimmed in an instant, then brightened up again. Then, the lights dimmed again. At this moment, a human face appeared in front of her eyes the moment the lights came back on. "Ah!" She was suddenly shocked, feeling that her heart was about to jump out. Her hands and feet were cold. "I'm sorry, I scared you." The lights in the corridor suddenly returned to normal and no longer flickered. The nurse saw a man with his long hair casually tied up. He looked to be in his 30s, wore white gloves on both hands, and carried a shoulder bag on his back. He looked like a down-and-out scholar. "Teacher Poulin." "No, I'm just... forget it." The nurse shook her head, then frowned and asked, "Is there anything I can help you with?" "No, there's nothing." Mr. Poulin smiled and shook his head. "I'm just going to visit a friend. I didn't expect to scare you. It's already past the visiting hours." The nurse frowned. "Sir, you should leave, or you may disturb other patients' rest time." "Okay." Mr. Poulin nodded and directly left in front of the nurse. The nurse looked at him doubtfully and muttered, "The guards are getting more and more lax. They even let people in at this time." "Huh." After muttering, she suddenly remembered that the man with gloves didn't seem to care about the strange smell of the hospital at this time. Unexpectedly, his expression didn't change. After Mr. Poulin disappeared from the nurse's sight, he didn't leave the hospital immediately. He just found another way that could lead him to the observation room, where Mr. Smith's wife was currently in. When he came to the observation room, he looked through the glass window and saw that Mr. Smith seemed to have collapsed from exhaustion. He was curled up alone in the corner, wearing a messy set of clothes. Mr. Poulin took a glance and then quietly pushed open the door of the observation room, walking in and sitting in front of the unconscious Mrs. Deborah. He lifted a corner of the quilt and then took out Mrs. Deborah's arm from the quilt. Mr. Poulin carefully looked at the back of Mrs. Deborah's hand, as if thinking about something. Mrs. Deborah was in a deep sleep at this time. If it wasn't for the constantly beating instrument showing the data, Perhaps many people would have thought that Mrs. Deborah had been dead for a long time. On the arm that was taken out, there were livor mortis that only a dead person would have. Yes, not only was there livor mortis on Mrs. Deborah's arm, even the skin on her arm had been torn off. It was as though a gentle tearing would tear off a large piece. In fact, one could even see long, cream-colored worms within the torn skin. Is she going to die soon? Mr. Poulin lowered his head and looked carefully. Finally, he slowly sighed and took out a box from his shoulder bag. The box was just an ordinary preservation box. As for what was inside, it was some soil with fresh moss. This was what he had dug out early in the morning from the forest in the outskirts of the town. He had met the new students of the divinity school on the bus this morning, not because they had to exercise early, but because he had gotten the black soil from the preservation box in the outskirts of the forest more than 10 kilometers away. Mr. Poulin casually grabbed a handful of black soil from the box and then gently sprinkled it on Mrs. Deborah's body. No one knew what he was trying to do or what he was doing. All they knew was that the sudden appearance of the black moss had actually restored Mrs. Deborah's rotting arm. In fact, not much time had passed. Mrs. Deborah, who was unconscious on the sickbed, became very energetic because of the black soil sprinkled on her body. Later, Mr. Poulin slowly retreated and left the observation room. He came in front of Mr. Smith and then sprinkled the black soil with moss on Mr. Smith's body. It turned out that Mr. Smith's neck had a similar condition as Mrs. Deborah's rotting arm. After Mr. Smith's neck had recovered, Mr. Poulin looked at the little black soil left in the preservation box and gently shook his head. "Go and get some more tomorrow," Mr. Poulin muttered. Mr. Smith suddenly woke up. He carelessly wiped his face and then quickly got up. He wanted to keep an eye on the observation room so that he could inform the doctor immediately if something happened, but he didn't expect that he would fall asleep. It seemed that he was so tired that he had hallucinations. Mr. Smith felt that he seemed to have heard the voice from half a year ago, but when he woke up, nothing happened. He had to treat this as his imagination running wild because he was too tired. He quickly glanced at Mrs. Deborah in the observation room. All the instruments showed that everything was normal, and Mrs. Deborah's complexion seemed to be healthier. Mr. Smith subconsciously smiled. This was a good news, but Joe, his eldest son, still hadn't been found. This made Mr. Smith feel like he was covered by a layer of shadow, and he felt uneasy and nervous all the time. After midnight, the strange smell in the hospital gradually dissipated. The medical staff and most of the patients could finally take off their masks. Although the work in the latter half of the night was tiring, it unexpectedly made them sober. Only a few old people, who didn't know why, suddenly cried in the latter half of the night. They said that they couldn't live anymore. In fact, they didn't want to die. But who didn't want to die? After Mr. Poulin left the hospital, he walked alone on the street. Such a late night seemed to be very compatible with his footsteps. He always gave people a feeling that he seemed to belong to the night. Then, the lively sound broke the silence. Mr. Poulin stopped in front of a bar that was still open. He looked at the colorful bar door and listened to the sound of music from inside, and just stood there. "Don't you want to go in, Mr. Poulin?" Mr. Poulin turned his head and saw Luaccio, the new student of the School of Divinity, on the bus in the morning. "It's you." Mr. Poulin showed a slight smile, watching Luaccio walking slowly to his side. He shook his head and said with a smile, "I'm not suitable for lively and crowded places." Boss Luo thought for a while. "You like lively and crowded places?" Mr. Poulin still shook his head and then said indifferently, "Actually, I only need to look at it from a distance. It's actually not bad." Boss Luo directly said, "Mr. Smith, are you interested in going in for a drink?" Chapter 1502. Today is going to be the day, today will be, that they're going to throw it back to you. They will return to your day, but you should somehow, now you should more or less, realize what you got to do. How should you do it? Wonderwall. Inside the dark bar, with red brick walls and black floors, the music that was playing wasn't particularly noisy. It made people feel comfortable. Luaccio actually didn't enter the bar many times, but he seemed to be more grateful than Teacher Poulin, at least in the eyes of outsiders. Teacher Poulin was sizing up everything inside with great interest. Both of his hands were holding the cup, and his head and body were slightly swaying along with the rhythm of the music. More than half of the foam in the beer cup had already disappeared. "It's not as good as I expected," Luaccio suddenly said. Teacher Poulin shrugged and answered, "It's strange that you don't use the tone of a question, although it is indeed a question and always gives people the desire to answer. You have a very special ability, or rather, power." Boss Luo smiled, picking up the lemon slice from the bartender and smearing it on the rim of the cup. "If Miss Maid was here, she would probably do this directly. She would think of you all the time." Luaccio couldn't help but realize the horror of this habit. It wasn't a bad thing, but the feeling of missing. "Teacher also has it," Luaccio whispered. "After entering, it's obviously quieter here. Their voices also become softer unconsciously." That was indeed the case. From the moment they came in, the voices of the drinkers had unknowingly lowered by 1 decibel after another. Even the music played by the resident singer had become softer. Well, at least the metallic taste had become lighter. Teacher Poulin answered the first question, nodding. "It's really not as good as I expected." Boss Luo suddenly asked, "Teacher, is this really the first time you enter the bar? I heard from the students that you've been working in the School of Theology for half a year." He used a more precise tone of inquiry. Teacher Poulin, who had noticed this, turned his chair around and faced the new students of the Divine Institute. He blinked his eyes and said, "If I were to say that I've never entered this kind of place, or even other adult entertainment places, would you believe me?" He seemed to be at least in his 30s. In Britain, where ideas were more advanced, men who had never entered adult entertainment places, bars, and such could probably be listed as national treasures. Why not? Boss Luo smiled slightly. Teacher Pulley looked at him and said quite seriously, "If I say there seems to be a magical force in these places, regulating me, forbidding me to enter, would you believe it?" Luo didn't express his opinion, but he talked about what happened in the morning. "Just like I said, we didn't encounter monsters easily, but the sirens appeared immediately. Who can say these things accurately? It's really interesting to chat with you." Teacher Pu Lin shook his head, then pushed the glass of beer away. Actually, he didn't drink a single sip, but at this moment, he directly ordered a glass of juice from the bartender. "But obviously, you might feel bored chatting with me, because I'm obviously someone who doesn't have much in common with the current generation of youngsters. You can never imagine how boring my private life is." "Since it's boring," Luaccio looked at Teacher Poulin with interest, "then you have the idea to change." Poulin shook his head. "I seem to want to continue like this. Maybe there's something that even I don't know, waiting for it. I'll tell you a secret, as a reward for inviting me here. It's my pleasure. I've had this feeling of waiting for something since I was a child." Teacher Poulin said seriously, "Something like a mission. I can occasionally feel it, as if it's my destiny." "Teacher, do you agree with fatalism? We studied it at first in order to find sufficient arguments against it." Teacher Poulin thought for a while and said, "But you'll find that many people will be eroded by fate in this process and feel the horror of fate." Luaccio said, "This is obviously not the point of view of a theology teacher. Theology is science. I remember there are such slogans in the school corridor." Teacher Poulin looked at Luaccio meaningfully. "If we're the same as the people here drinking and chatting, what's your purpose here?" Luaccio asked curiously, "Teacher, are you the manager here, or do you plan to be the manager here?" Teacher Poulin shrugged his shoulders and said, "That kind of thing isn't suitable for me. This country originally had a nightly organization with the role of a manager. Actually, there's a place for this organization to handle matters in our academy. It's just that you won't run into them on normal days. After all, this school still has many students with family backgrounds." As early as the first day of school, when going through the formalities, Boss Luo felt the existence of the enchantment. Of course, the power of this enchantment would not be too strong. At most, it could resist things like Ghost Nero that Nero spat out. "Teacher, have you been in contact with them?" "No." Teacher Poulin shook his head and said, "They don't know me. The knights in the school can't feel me yet, just like they can't feel you. In fact, at the beginning, I almost ignored this point. Your existence is sometimes absent. You are a special individual who can completely control your own life. Boss Luo joked. Your life is controlled by yourself. Teacher Poulin shook his head and then looked at the dark corner of the bar. A man was sleeping on the table. Teacher Poulin tapped his finger on the table and then hooked his finger. A wonderful scene happened. A shadow was hooked out from the back of the sleeping man and then floated towards Teacher Poulin and Boss Luo. There was a dark green thread connecting this figure to the man. However, the strange thing was that everyone in the bar seemed to turn a blind eye to this scene. Or rather, they couldn't see this magical scene at all. The shadow finally floated to Teacher Poulin's side. The shadow lowered its head as if it was asleep. Looking carefully, it was the appearance of the man. This is his lifeline. This is his soul. At this moment, Teacher Poulin said indifferently, I can see this line, and I can also sever it. In theory, as long as I can see this lifeline, I can also kill it. But I can't see you. Boss Luo wasn't surprised by Teacher Poulin's ability. At least, Teacher Poulin was very confused about this. She wondered if this calmness was a forced effect. After the lifeline is cut, this person's soul will be taken away by you? Luochio asked softly. As the source of your ability, I will take it away. Teacher Poulin revealed a surprised expression. Soon after, he thought for a while and said, I can send them away, but I'm not sure where they'll be sent to. Indeed, even though I'm not sure where they'll be sent to, they'll definitely be able to gradually strengthen my abilities. Boss Luo thought for a while and said, according to this, if you can cut off all the lifelines in the world and take away their souls, have you ever imagined how strong you will be? Teacher Poulin was startled. She looked at Luochio curiously. Why should I do this? Boss Luo smiled casually. Don't you think this ability exists to do this kind of thing? Didn't I just say your destiny? Teacher Poulin frowned at this moment. She looked at this new student of theology school with a strange expression. She shook her head and said, I suddenly thought, if one day this world ushers in the doomsday because of me, you may be the murderer who brings the doomsday. Maybe this world is stronger than you think. Boss Luo smiled. Then he joked, have you seen the manga of the gorilla warrior who can transform into a golden warrior, the one called Ryukong? Teacher Poulin was stunned. She didn't know why this new student suddenly mentioned it. Luochio nodded and said, you see, even if there is such a powerful alien, isn't the earth still very strong? Teacher Poulin was startled, and she was amused. Her laughter was completely different from people his age. It was like a child's laughter. Her eyes were full of curiosity about new things. The world is very strong. His laughter stopped at an opportune moment as he muttered this sentence. Then, he nodded and said rather seriously, actually, I also think that it would be better for the world to be livelier. If all that you see is cold death, it will not be good. Thank you. Boss Luo smiled. Thank you for not letting me become the culprit who brings the doomsday. I can only drink this. Teacher Poulin raised a glass of juice and gently touched Boss Luo's glass. I am very happy to meet you as a friend. Friend, for Luochio, it seemed to be a very distant thing. After pondering for a while, he smiled and picked up the cup. At this moment, Teacher Poulin said softly, I like your current smile a little more. You should pay more attention when you go to school. I don't want the female students to become distracted during class. Luochio pretended not to hear this teasing. He just asked curiously, Teacher, don't you think it is dangerous to tell me your ability and even show it in front of me? Teacher Poulin was puzzled. Why do you think it is dangerous? Luochio said casually, probably because you don't like to expose your secrets. However, Teacher Poulin said, possessing strength isn't some special secret. On the contrary, this is perhaps even more of a painful thing. I hope to have someone to share it with. Compared to the so-called danger of exposing a secret, don't you think that the loneliness, anxiety, and suspicion brought by keeping a secret by yourself is more uncomfortable? Boss Luo was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. Teacher Poulin said, of course, even if you are exposed, please choose the person you think you can trust. Boss Luo said, Teacher, You think I can be trusted? Teacher Poulin shrugged. I can't be sure, but at least your ability seems to be so. Of course, it may not be so. This is actually better. But if that's the case, then it's actually not that bad. At the very least, such an ability can affect my thinking. This also proves that even if you don't know my ability, you still have the means to deal with me. You might even have the power to harm me. This way, whether you know or not doesn't make much of a difference to you. And whether I keep my secret or not doesn't mean much to you. In that case, why should I keep it? Even if you want to be honest with me, I don't intend to share my affairs with you in the end. Luaccio replied indifferently at this time. Teacher Poulin smiled. As a teacher, when teaching students, it is always hard at the beginning. After all, the teacher should be the one to take the initiative to contact. Luaccio closed his eyes. At this time, a black card suddenly appeared in his palm. The card began to roll between his fingers, as agile as a magician's poker card. Teacher Poulin watched with interest. He didn't know why this new student was doing this. He wasn't too surprised by the appearance of the black card because he knew from the beginning that this new student wasn't an ordinary person, so it wasn't strange for him to have this kind of little trick. It was just that Teacher Poulin, who didn't pay too much attention to the appearance of this black card, didn't notice that the imprint on the black card was constantly changing from 1 to 4. It was like some kind of unknown number, as if it was very difficult to have a clear definition. Finally, this black card stopped spinning between Boss Luo's fingers. Luaccio glanced at the card mark on the side facing him, then smiled slightly. He then looked at Teacher Poulin. I plan to give you something, but I'm not sure if I should give it to you now. Teacher Poulin was startled, then laughed and said, Then keep it first. When you feel that it is time to give it to me, then you can give it to me. Okay. Boss Luo nodded directly. Then, with a flip of his palm, this kind of black card disappeared. He picked up the cup in front of the table. This time, he took the initiative to touch Teacher Poulin's juice cup and said softly, I hope there won't be a time when I have to give this gift. You're really a strange student. Teacher Poulin shook his head and laughed. Chapter 1503. Why? Do you want to be a teacher? Luaccio and Poulin both seemed to have forgotten about the gift topic. They quietly listened to the resident singer sing a blues song. After that, Luaccio asked another question. I always feel like you're a reporter, and I'm doing an interview. Poulin couldn't help but laugh. Luaccio also smiled. He used the beautiful smile that Poulin said before. He replied, Someone in my family is indeed a reporter. This is the first time you revealed information about your family to me. Poulin smiled and said, Does this mean that as a student, you have begun to trust me as a teacher? Luaccio shook his head and immediately said, Do you like the feeling of being trusted? Poulin honestly said that no one didn't like being trusted by others. Trust represented need, and being needed was easy to be satisfied. But what happened after being satisfied? He didn't say. Luaccio didn't continue to ask. Poulin answered the previous question. Actually, for a long time, I didn't know what I should do. Actually, it's not necessarily the profession of teacher. In fact, I learned everything very quickly. The reason why I became a teacher was because I happened to encounter this job recruitment. Because of Professor Jiatu's sudden disappearance? Luaccio curiously asked. Poulin pondered for a while before slowly saying, I saw that Claudia seemed to care about you. Well, and the female student who asked for leave today. She's probably the one who told you about Professor Jiatu. Boss Luo nodded. Poulin continued. Claudia suddenly transferred from the mathematics department after I took office. Although it's only a second-degree course, her degree of hard work is really rare. She always felt that I might have a special connection with Professor Jiatu's disappearance. Did she talk to you about this matter in person? Poulin shook his head and said, No, but I can feel that she is suspicious of me. After all, in her opinion, I am indeed mysterious. You see, I actually don't have any friends here. Even colleagues rarely communicate with each other. Even in this kind of occasion, if it weren't for your invitation, I might not have the opportunity to come in the future. As I said, I will bring death, just like the phantom you saw. The soul phantom that was hooked by Poulin from the man's body was still floating beside him. Mr. Poulin sent the phantom back to the man's body. He shook his head and said, "Sometimes it's difficult for me to control this ability. When my emotions fluctuate, it is also the most dangerous time, so I rarely communicate with others. I'm honored that you can tell me so many things. So, you don't know about Professor Siejo, right?" Teacher Pulin thought for a moment and said, "That's right. I've never even met this Professor Siejo, and I don't even know why he disappeared. My understanding of him is probably that I inherited some of the teaching plans he left behind. Some of his views on theology are actually quite interesting. For example, his understanding of the Trinity is the past, present, and future. Claudia mentioned this idea in class, but I don't think she came up with this idea herself. She read some of the materials left by Professor Siejo." Luo Chio nodded. At this time, he could already be sure that there was no relationship between Professor Pulin and Professor Siejo. There was no need to investigate this matter specifically. He could feel that Professor Pulin would not hide anything about this matter. "You seem to be quite interested in the Trinity in one." Teacher Pulin seemed to be keenly aware of some things. At this moment, he looked at him with a slightly profound meaning. Luochio just shook his head slightly and said vaguely, "I don't have any clues for the time being. Maybe I have an idea inadvertently." Pulin suddenly became puzzled, but he asked patiently, "You seem to have encountered some trouble." Luochio said indifferently, "For the time being, it's not a particularly serious matter." For the time being." Teacher Pulin thought for a while, then nodded and said, "You give me a feeling that you can solve anything. So, I believe that you won't be trouble for too long, so much so that you actually enjoy this kind of confusion right now." Luochio looked up at him and asked curiously, "Why do you say that?" Pulin smiled and said, "Your expression doesn't look like you're troubled at all. It's more like a person who likes to solve puzzles and has encountered a new puzzle." Boss Luo shook his head. "You're making me sound too scary." Teacher Pulin played it down and said, "Actually, you know it yourself." Boss Luo asked back, "Just like you know it yourself?" Pulin said softly, "Yes." Later, another group of people came to the bar. It was Uncle Pick, who was wearing a kilt, and the sheriff and another police officer from the police station who had already gotten off work. Uncle Pick obviously didn't notice the young people sitting in the corner in front of Mr. Smith's restaurant in the evening. He very familiarly led them to a table and sat down. The bartender came up to greet them, and Uncle Pick said to just follow the old rules. This old man seemed to be full of vitality. Most of the young people in the bar seemed to have something on their mind or indulge themselves to their heart's content. But this old man seemed to be enjoying life. He was actually not young, and his life was counting down. Maybe he knew it, or maybe he didn't care about it. Uncle Bick was a good drinker. He finished a large glass of beer in one gulp, the kind that was 1 liter of beer. The people sitting next to him all cheered. Then Uncle Bick asked the owner of the bar to bring him an organ. He then ran to the stage and played with the band on the stage. Boss Luo and Pulin looked away from Uncle Pick almost at the same time. Pulin suddenly said faintly, "If it's possible, I don't want to take Mr. Pick away, but he seems to have more time. Although I don't know what happened, it's still a good thing." Luochio thought for a while and said, "Teacher, will you not take him away because you don't want to part with him? Those who want to leave will always have to leave." Pulin shook her head and said, "It's like fate, just like the 3 sirens we discussed this morning." "Then why do you want to keep Mr. Smith's family?" Boss Luo asked suddenly. Pulin frowned, and then looked at Luochio suspiciously. Luochio said indifferently, "Teacher, we've had dinner together in Mr. Smith's restaurant." Pulin sighed slowly, shaking her head, and said, "I don't want to talk about this. I didn't say I'm a fair person." "It doesn't matter." Boss Luo said softly, "I can't be absolutely fair myself." Teacher Pulin smiled faintly and suddenly said, "No, perhaps you don't know, but I'm afraid you're a little more just than you think. This is your nature. I can feel that my senses are a little sharper than an ordinary person's. So, you could be more confident." Luochio couldn't help frowning. No one had ever mentioned to him that he wasn't confident. Miss Maid always followed him, and the Black Soul envoys in the shop never disobeyed him. Even if there were, they couldn't disobey him. Looking back, Luochio found that there was nothing he couldn't do now, not confident. Actually, I also had such a time. Poulin said slowly. I felt my power getting stronger and stronger, and my influence getting wider and wider. In the end, I had to seal this power. He raised his hands with white gloves and said, "This power is beyond human cognition, and it brings me fear. I'm afraid that I can't control it in the end, resulting in uncontrollable consequences." You're the same. Boss Luo just smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Teacher Pu Lin sighed and said, "Before I settled down to teach here, I traveled to many countries. I also met many young people like you who had just obtained power. Most of them were like this because they didn't know what they wanted to do in the end. After they were strong enough to satisfy all their needs in the past, and after completing these needs in a short period of time, they became perplexed and restless. Then, they embarked on the path of crime." Boss Luo opened his mouth. Probably because of his occupational disease, this teacher seemed to regard him as a young child who became confused after getting great power. He looked at teacher Pu Lin curiously. "In that case, are you guiding them again?" Pu Lin shrugged and said, "Some are easy to communicate with. After the communication, they will gradually return to their original life path. They will gradually understand that this sudden power is just a tool for living, not the ruler of their life. When they accept and fully master the power, the number of times they use the power will be less. Humans are like this. Things that are too easy to get, their happiness will be lower. Without happiness, people will be lost." Luochio thought for a while and said, "Teacher, have you met people who are lost?" Poulin said affirmatively. "Of course, there are many. In fact, most of these people can't return to their original life path. Their thoughts have been dominated by power, and they believe more in the law of the jungle. In fact, this is a very funny thing. The law of the jungle is not wrong, but the wrong idea is that power is everything. To be honest, I don't like to talk about power, but young people prefer this." Luochio suddenly smiled. Poulin asked curiously, "Is there something on my face?" Boss Luo suddenly said, "Teacher, you are really suitable to continue to be a teacher. Maybe you don't know it yourself. You said that you just happened to come across this job, so that's why you became a teacher. But behind that, you also like this profession." Poulin thought for a while, shook his head and said noncommittally, "Maybe, but I can't say why I look forward to this profession." Boss Luo looked at the time. It's getting late. Teacher Pu Lin saw the other party's intention to leave, so he simply said, "I'm very happy that you invited me in. This meal is on me. As a teacher, it's better not to let the students spend too much money. Even if you spend money, it won't be a condition for you to learn science." Boss Luo couldn't help but smile. Poulin put down the money on the table, then went around the people who were attracted by Uncle Bick and quietly left the bar. Boss Luo gently shook the glass in his hand. His eyes suddenly turned to somewhere in front of the long table. He saw a black cat squatting at the edge of the counter, quietly looking at him. This was the black cat that he saw in the back alley of Mr. Smith's restaurant. Boss Luo recognized it at first sight. "He still can't see you?" Luochio looked at the little black cat and asked softly. The black cat's eyes suddenly turned. Then it jumped down from the counter and quickly ran into the crowd, disappearing. Boss Luo shook his head and was about to get up and leave. Before leaving, Boss Luo glanced at the potato chips on the table. This was a snack that was given when he bought the wine. He thought for a while and packed it. Far away in time and space, Adam, show me the hidden error report of highest wisdom in the past 10 years. Also, give me a cup of coffee, thank you. Miss Servant Girl, who was wearing a work skirt, was sitting in front of the screen, her fingers dancing like butterflies on the piano keys. Lines of code written with special characters were like flowing water. The cup of coffee with a strong fragrance was put beside Miss Servant Girl. It was just within her reach. Miss Servant Girl casually reached out her hand to grab it. But the moment her hand touched the cup, it was gently held. "Master." Miss Servant Girl raised her head and saw her master standing behind her. "I'm here to visit you." Boss Luo pointed at the border door behind him, smiling. "I brought some consolation." He put a small box on the table. Miss Servant Girl curiously opened it, then blinked and said with surprise, "Potato chips." "Yes." Boss Luo chuckled, directly picking up a potato chip and feeding it to Miss Servant Girl, saying, I heard that overtime and snacks are more compatible. In fact, I also brought instant noodles. Miss Servant Girl looked at her master with more surprise. Boss Luo directly rolled up his sleeves, waving his hand, and a ready-made kitchen appeared behind him. He walked in and said, It'll be ready soon. Wait a moment. Miss Servant Girl's eyes were full of confusion. Chapter 1504. He didn't need to be busy, but at this moment, he was busy in the temporarily created kitchen, pinched up sleeves, unbuttoned collar buttons, and back view. Yi knew her master was thinking about something. Therefore, Miss Maid stopped what she was doing. She even knocked on the table lightly. All the functions of Adam came to a halt and were in a completely shut-down state. It was better to be silent at this time. Only the hissing sound of the burning gas stove could be heard. But Luocio didn't deliberately prolong this simple cooking time. Everything was done in an orderly manner. Soon, he came back with 2 bowls of cooked noodles. Both of his hands were holding the bowls with chopsticks on the mouths of the bowls. I just remembered that I haven't had dinner either. Boss Luo sat down and said with a smile. Miss Maid left Eve to deal with the daily work. According to her understanding of her master, something must have happened at night. But he didn't take the initiative to mention it, so she didn't ask. He would tell her when necessary. Master, do you want to have a look here after you finish eating? Miss Maid suddenly said, the civilization here has some characteristics. Mainly, the scenery is good. But Boss Luo didn't seem to be interested. He shook his head, put down the chopsticks, and looked into Miss Maid's eyes. After a while, he said, Yu Yi, do you think I'm omnipotent? The owner of the shop, in theory, is infinitely close to being omnipotent. Miss Maid replied after thinking seriously. Luocio shook his head. I said I. Miss Maid asked, Master, do you want to be omnipotent? Luocio thought for a while. What does it mean to be omnipotent? Miss Maid said almost without thinking. To be needed. Omnipotent means to be needed by everything. If you're not needed, you can't achieve it. The ability to be omnipotent is equal to having no ability. Do you need me? He asked softly. Miss Maid walked behind the boss and hugged him from behind. She whispered in his ear, For Yu Yi, you are my everything. For the master, I could be the one who can do anything. If master wants to come into contact with that domain, then go ahead. Luocio closed his eyes and felt the puppet body that was no different from his real body. He suddenly smiled and said, You always know what I'm thinking. Miss Maid also closed her eyes and said in a lower voice, Now, there are not many things that can embarrass Master. Miss Rin is one of them, but I believe that nothing will happen to Miss Rin in such a short time. Before I left, Master asked me if my predecessor had stepped into the future domain. How do you see the future? Luocio asked faintly. Do you feel that compared to knowing the result, it's enough to care about the process, or are you afraid of the uncertainty of the future, so you feel more at ease after knowing the result directly? Was it better to know or not to know? If you want to know, just know. Don't worry about anything. Anything can be changed as long as you are willing. Miss Maid gave an answer that only she could give. If you think the future is bad, then come back to change it. If the future is good, then enjoy the present process step by step. That's true. Boss Luo held her palm. What a willful answer. Aren't you afraid that after the change, the future won't be able to experience what she has already experienced and will disappear? Or even, she won't have the chance to experience it again. She raised her head and said, Since you want to come back to change something, at least it proves that at least one thing in the future is wrong. He doesn't want Master to have any unhappy things in the future. Such an unhappy thing will exceed all the good things. I only need you to be happy. Actually, you missed one thing. Boss Luo turned around and hugged her in his arms. Things that can make me feel embarrassed include you. As long as he was willing, he could do anything. Boss Luo suddenly glanced at Adam, who was completely shut off in the distance, then whispered to Miss Maid, I'll stay a little longer. Okay. Boss Luo's visit took a little longer. When he returned to the manor, it was already midnight. Eve was responsible for the daily work during this period, so she waited very diligently. When Boss Luo returned, she had already reacted. She was basically no different from a real person, even perfect, just like the women in the legendary Garden of Eden. Eve, do you want to become a Chungren type? Boss Luo asked with a smile. He seemed to be in a good mood. But after all, she was just a simulated artificial intelligence. No matter how realistic her appearance was, even her micro-expressions were just like a real person's. It was still within rational logic. Humans need to eat and rest. Their individual abilities will decline with time, and they may even get injured easily, which will seriously affect the efficiency of work. Eve shook her head in confusion. Obviously, I don't want to become a Chungren type. Boss Luo just nodded and then asked abruptly, if Adam becomes a human, what will you do? Her electronic eyes flashed a few times, and she said with a blank expression, I'll still be me. Nothing will happen. We are all artificial intelligence created by Master Yu Yi, and we all serve her. Whatever Adam becomes, it won't affect my work. What if Adam affects your work? Boss Luo seemed to have more questions today. However, he still quickly replied, all obstacles that obstruct the command should be removed. Boss Luo suddenly laughed. There's a saying among humans, if you answer a question too quickly, it's probably not the truth. Eve tilted her head in confusion. I'm not a human, and I don't tell lies. That's why I said among humans. Boss Luo smiled casually. Okay, I'm going to rest. You go and do what you're supposed to do. Also, you don't have to prepare food for me during this time. Actually, it won't affect my body at all if I don't eat. Okay. Eve nodded respectfully and then walked back to the computer room without any hesitation. At night, in the small town police station, even though it was already past midnight and it was still resting time, the sheriff of the small town police station still came back after playing with Uncle Bick. In fact, he came in to take a look because he was passing by. Basically, nothing serious happened, except that a mentally ill man was locked up in the afternoon. Hey, I brought you some food, the sheriff shouted as he entered the station. This place was not big, and he could see everything except for a few offices. But to the sheriff's surprise, the colleague on duty, who had always heard that there were comforting food, did not respond at all. Did he go to the washroom? The sheriff could not help but feel suspicious. Then, he felt a little worried, so he quickly walked to the place where the prisoner was detained. Unexpectedly, in the corridor, the sheriff found his colleague lying on the ground, unable to get up. He looked at the iron door of the detention room. The iron door was already open, and there was no sign of the lunatic who was locked up in the afternoon and claimed that he was a Protoss. How are you? Wake up! Wake up! The sheriff kept shaking his colleague, but he could not wake him up. He could only pick up the walkie-talkie. Call, a prisoner escaped. Call. The sheriff had no choice but to report this to his colleagues who were patrolling outside. This was a big deal. If the lunatic was only locked up outside because he injured someone, it would be a normal case at most. But this time, he injured a police officer and escaped, so this was a big deal. Mayor Lotta quickly walked through the dark streets of the small town. In the end, the police officers were unable to keep a close eye on Socius, who came from the inhuman domain. As for how Socius escaped from the detention room, Mayor Lotta planned to never reveal it to anyone. He planned to bury this matter in the depths of his heart forever. A dignified Soth Protoss, the descendant of the once great god of war Ares, had been shut down by the human race. This was simply a great humiliation. Human wizard, I, Mayor Lotta, swear that the humiliation you have inflicted on me today, I will return it twice, 10 times, 20 times. Mayor Lotta secretly memorized the appearance of the powerful and mysterious old wizard, Wizard Pico, countless times in his mind. He clenched his fist tightly and punched the wall of the alley. However, when he punched the wall in anger, there was no damage to the wall at all. This was completely impossible in the past. Mayor Lotta could not help but lean against the wall dejectedly. He looked at his slightly trembling hands and said in a bitter voice, God, now that I've lost my power, what should I do? But he was only depressed for a moment, and then he quickly pulled himself together. He had encountered more difficult things in the past. When the Inhuman Domain team carried out a great purge of the Soth Protoss, The situation was much more serious than now. He had to face the threat of death every day, but he never gave up. I need to find the crystal given to me by the god. Mayor Lada, who had pulled himself together, quickly made the task given to him by the god of darkness his top priority. But before that, he needed to find the lost crystal. Where would it fall? He had already searched the police station when he came out, but did not find it. So the biggest possibility was that it fell at the place where he was beaten up by the old wizard. Fortunately, the town was not very big, and the terrain was not very complicated. So Mayor Lada quickly found the place where he was beaten up and met the old wizard. He carefully searched for it. Why? Why is it not here? Mayor Lada could not help but feel frightened. He was even more frightened than when he lost his power. Impossible, it must have fallen somewhere. It cannot be missing. Could it be that the old wizard secretly took it away? Impossible, it must still be here. Look carefully, look for it. Anxiety made people panic, and when panic reached a certain level, they would not know what to do. Mayor Lada was even lying on the ground at this time. Is there anything I can help you with? Suddenly, Mayor Lada heard a voice coming from behind him. This made Mayor Lada feel frightened. He was approached by someone, and he did not feel anything at all. This high-level Soth god could not help but feel a lingering fear. He forced himself to calm down and stood up, sizing up the person who talked to him. He looked like a weak, ordinary person, wearing round black glasses. His hair was in a small braid, his hands were wearing white gloves, and he carried a shoulder bag. He was a man in his 30s. It's none of your business. I don't need your help. Mayor Lada snorted coldly. If it was a day ago, he would not even bother to talk to the inferior human race. But now he just wanted to find the thing that the god of darkness gave him as soon as possible and did not want to cause any more problems. How could he be afraid of humans because he had lost all his power? Is that so? Teacher Poulin nodded. If that is the case, then I will not disturb you. But I will give you a suggestion. You look like you're looking for something, right? Uh-huh. My Lada frowned, but his curiosity was piqued. It is already so late, and the nearby streets have already been cleaned. Teacher Poulin smiled and said, So, if you lost something, it is very likely that it has been swept away by the sanitation workers. Maybe you can go to the nearby garbage disposal station to look for it. Of course, I think the possibility of it being picked up by someone is higher. Maybe you can choose to report it. With the degree of peace in this town, it was believed that the sheriff who had nothing to do would be very happy to look for lost objects as a digestive project after a meal. Humph. Mayor Lada snorted coldly at this time. If you don't say it, do you think I won't know? Mind your own business. Human. Teacher Poulin blinked his eyes, then shook his head. Without saying anything, he walked away from the strange man. However, my Lada clenched his teeth at this moment and abruptly called Teacher Poulin back. Wait, come back. I have something to ask you. Teacher Poulin turned around and said with a smile, Is there anything else I can help you with? Mayor Lada hesitated for a moment, then said indifferently, Tell me, where is the garbage disposal station? Listen, if you do something for me, I will not treat you badly. I can fulfill one of your wishes. Chapter 1505. In front of the garbage disposal station, Mayor Lada was like a gold digger. He plunged into the stinky garbage, opening up bag after bag of garbage. Mr. Poulin couldn't help but open his mouth. With such a scene, he would probably curse when the sanitation workers arrived before sunrise. He shook his head and tried to clean up the garbage Mayor Lada had opened up. Perhaps you can tell me what the thing you lost looks like. It is better and faster to find it with two people than one. My Lada abruptly stopped. His gaze was fierce as he stared at Teacher Poulin. He said coldly, Human, why are you treating me so well? Do you want to obtain some benefits from me? Mr. Poulin was surprised at first. Then he sighed and said with a calm voice, Being good to others, have you heard of it? Mayor Lada sneered. He threw away the garbage in his hand and straightened his chest. I only know about the arrogance, greed, cruelty, and treachery of humans. Good? Don't joke around. Mr. Poulin opened his mouth and then asked curiously, This mister, do you have some misunderstanding about humans? Misunderstanding? Mayor Lotta snorted. If there is kindness, it is only the comfort when you humans lick each other's wounds when you humans are weak. When you humans grasp power, what is left is only evil and aggression. Aggression? Teacher Pu Lin furrowed his brows and sized up the person in front of him who was wearing a black robe. More or less, his attire was somewhat incongruous with that of an ordinary person. From his observations, this tall and thin man with a stern expression was only an ordinary person. You come from a war-torn country? Mr. Pullen thought for a while and asked probingly, Have you killed people before? Mayor Lotta just sneered and didn't say anything. He continued to rummage through the garbage. Mr. Pullen shook his head and continued to tidy up the place Mayor Lotta had messed up. When it was about time, Mr. Pullen reminded him, This part is probably even older. I have been looking for it for so long. I can roughly judge that it is very likely that the thing has been taken away. So, are you really not going to report it? Mind your own business. Mayo Lotta said angrily, What I do, how I do, is not up to a puny human like you to interfere. While I still have patience, hurry up and get out of my sight, otherwise a cuckoo. The sudden gurgling sound was especially loud at dawn. My Lotta's face stiffened, but he still clenched his teeth to make himself look even more vicious. You will regret this, goo-goo. There's a cafeteria not far ahead. It's open 24 hours a day. Teacher Poulin smiled. Do you want to go? Me? I don't need your help. Goo-goo. Teacher Poulin ordered a cup of black coffee and sat quietly, reading a hardcover book with relish, Grimm's Fairy Tales. On the opposite side of the table, my Lotta was wolfing down a plate of spaghetti with meat sauce. The way he ate could be described as a hungry man. This was actually the 5th plate of spaghetti with meat sauce, but my Lotta's stomach was like a bottomless pit. The waiter who brought the plate was amazed by his amazing appetite. The taste of this food is not bad. What is it called? My Lotta suddenly raised his head and asked. Teacher Poulin put down Grimm's Fairy Tales in her hand, looking at the man whose lips were covered with gravy and even grabbed the noodles with his hands, curiously asking, Haven't you eaten spaghetti with meat sauce before? How can I eat human food? He instantly sneered and disdained, but his expression soon became a little embarrassed. He quickly wiped his hands covered with gravy on his robe, and his expression became serious, saying indifferently, As I said, if you take me to the garbage disposal station, I will fulfill one of your wishes. Including this meal, I will add one more. Tell me, what is your wish? Wealth? Power? Land? Women? I'm quite curious. Teacher Poulin took off his round-rimmed glasses and asked while slowly wiping them, What do you think? Why would I think that you're capable of realizing the things you're talking about for me, for someone who looks as terrible as you do now? You look down on me? My Lotta was like a wolf whose tail was stepped on, his eyes wide open. Teacher Poulin tilted his head and suddenly said, You should be a little younger than you look. Is it because you look more mature? No matter how one looked at it, my Lotta looked like a man of 35 or 36 years old, like Teacher Poulin's age. At this age, he should be calm. Even if he was the type with a fiery and impulsive personality, he shouldn't be so inflexible, which was why Teacher Poulin asked this question. My Lotta didn't say anything and grabbed the fork to stab at Teacher Poulin. Only, this sudden attack was blocked by Professor Poulin in the end with the Grimm's Fairy Tales in his hands. My Lotta furrowed his brows. Even though he had lost all his strength and was even troubled by hunger like an ordinary person, this attack was already unexpected. He had blocked it, and he had done so in an unhurried manner. My Lotta slowly took back the hand holding the fork and frowned, asking, What are you trying to do by following me? This seemingly harmless man in front of him might be the same as that old human mage, inhuman hidden in the crowd. My Lotta, who had already lost all of his power, had even lost his sharp senses. He could only make a simple judgment, and thus couldn't be sure. However, my Lotta knew that the inhuman in the inhuman domain had always maintained a close relationship with the modern world, and many inhumans even lived directly in the modern world. I don't have any intentions. Teacher Poulin shook her head. First of all, You are a new face, so I feel strange. Second, you seem to be troubled by trouble. My Lotta sneered, obviously not believing Teacher Pullen's words. Since you don't want anything, then don't approach me. With that, my Lotta retreated step by step until he walked out of the 24-hour restaurant. However, what my Lotta did not expect was that just as he walked out of the restaurant's entrance, several strong beams of light came toward him. He saw that there were 2 police cars and 3 motorcycles parked outside the restaurant's entrance. 6 police officers were pointing their guns at him. Don't move. Don't try to resist. The police officers shouted at this time. My Lotta obviously did not expect these people to find him so quickly. He was startled and then clenched his fist, but the surging power had long since disappeared, and he had no choice but to let go of his hand dejectedly. Raise your hand high. Turn around. Give up resistance. My Lotta clenched his teeth. He had seen these firearms created by humans. He knew the power of these firearms. Half a day ago, he was not afraid of these firearms at all, but now, my Lotta could only slowly raise both his hands, feeling this extraordinary shame and humiliation, secretly swearing. He slowly turned around. At this time, through the glass door of the restaurant, he saw Teacher Pullen walking toward him. My Lotta couldn't help but be startled. In front of the restaurant's entrance, a thick grayish-white fog suddenly rose up. Several police officers couldn't help but panic. However, this thick fog came in a strange way, and, at the same time, it also left very quickly. But when this thick fog dissipated, they had lost track of the fugitive. My Lotta had disappeared at an unknown time. Outside a few alleys, my Lotta furrowed his brows and shook off Teacher Pullen's hand that was grabbing on his arm. Within the thick fog, my Lotta was directly pulled by the other. Soon after, he quickly walked over to this place. That was not the speed that an ordinary human should have, but my Lotta was not too surprised because he had already determined that the other party was not simple. However, this kind of fast walking made him, who had lost his strength, look very miserable. He tried to adjust his breathing to make himself look more normal, but he was unable to cover up his pale face. Why did they want to capture you? Teacher Pullen turned around and asked expressionlessly. You don't know why they captured me. Why did you save me? My Lotta threw back a question. Teacher Pullen said indifferently, there will always be times when one takes the wrong path. If one takes the wrong path, it will be fine as long as they correct it. My Lotta couldn't help but sneer. How do you know that there's a possibility of turning back from this wrong path? Do they all want to see him die? Teacher Pullen sighed and said faintly, then at least, let me be one of them. Let him know that there's at least one other person who wants to tell him. Hey, you took the wrong path. Childish. My Lotta snorted coldly and then looked around the surroundings. But this time he was much more careful. If you go out like this, you will be easily caught. Teacher Pullen reminded him. My Lotta said disdainfully, they're just some ordinary people with firearms. If not for me, humph. It will be dawn soon. After dawn, it will be more difficult for you to hide. Teacher Pullen said indifferently, since you lost something and want to find it back, then at least don't let yourself get caught. My Lotta turned around and muttered, you have a place to hide? Teacher Pullen nodded silently. I live here. Teacher Pullen pointed at the house that looked like it had been abandoned for a long time and said. My Lotta looked at the house in surprise. Why was this guy not joking? This house did not look like it had been abandoned for a long time, but more like a building from another century compared to the surrounding houses. Usually no one comes here. Teacher Pullen smiled and said, the police usually don't come here. There was a murder case here before. When I came here, a ghost lived here and liked to scare people. Teacher Pullen didn't say what happened to the ghost later, but my Lotta could easily think of several possibilities, so he didn't bother to care about a small ghost. He casually leaned against the wall of the house and sat down, not caring that the floor was covered with dust. In order to avoid the pursuit of the Magician Association, he had stayed in an environment 100 times worse than here, so he naturally didn't care about this at this time. Teacher Pullen turned on the tap and gave him a glass of water. He took it but didn't drink it. Instead, he said, you are going to help a person. Aren't you afraid that this person is unpardonable and the crimes caused by him are enough to kill him thousands of times? Of course I am afraid. Teacher Poulin shrugged and said, but the most frightening thing is that he is not willing to turn back, even if he knows that the end of the road is destruction. What a hypocrite! My Lotta sneered. If this person killed your loved ones and let you spend the rest of your life in pain, can you still be so determined? Teacher Poulin slowly sat down facing him. Also on the floor, I was abandoned at the door of a church when I was young, and the priest of the church adopted me. My Lotta frowned, not knowing why he suddenly mentioned this. Teacher Poulin said, when I was 10 years old, a thief broke into the church and was discovered by the priest. In the struggle, the thief stabbed the priest's heart with a candlestick. You killed the thief? My Lotta's eyes didn't blink. Teacher Poulin looked at him and didn't say a word. My Lotta subconsciously avoided his gaze, and only then did he continue to speak. Ever since I was very young, I had some abilities that were different from ordinary people. That time, I was somewhat unable to control myself, and I almost killed this thief. Almost. My Lotta opened his mouth. Teacher Poulin said indifferently, before my godfather died, he asked me to forgive the thief. You let him go? I did. Teacher Poulin nodded his head. After I grew up, I met him again. His time was up, and he was knocked down by a car while crossing the road in order to save a child. My Lotta refuted. Perhaps he was originally a good person, but he had no choice but to go steal from the church. Thus, he saved the child. But do not forget, some people are born evil. Teacher Poulin shook his head and said, I am not telling you this because I want to argue with you. I simply want to tell you that this is the environment I grew up in, and the reason why I am doing this. In the end, whether you accept it or not, I do not intend to force you. Simply put, I see that you can still be saved, so I want to help you. My Lotta quibbled. If I were to go kill someone tomorrow, kill those policemen who are chasing me, would you regret helping me now? Teacher Poulin shook his head again. Within my range of sight, I will not let you do this. But in a place where I cannot see, no matter what you do, it will not affect me because that is your fate. Time will give you the fairest judgment. My Lotta opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't refute anything. Then, he wrapped himself in his robe and said in a low voice, Good night. Teacher Poulin smiled casually, then found an indifferent sofa and sat down. Then, he opened Grimm's fairy tales and began to read again. Although the lights in the room were not on, he was able to read clearly because behind him there was a faint flame, a pale white ball of flame floating in the air, a will-o'-the-wisp. Chapter 1506. Later, Teacher Poulin took a nap. When he woke up, he saw my Lotta kneeling on the ground, his hands crossed before his chest. His lips moved slightly, as if he was muttering something. It should be something similar to a prayer. As a teacher of the seminary, Teacher Poulin could easily tell what the other person believed in. He did not disturb him. After my Lotta finished his set and opened his eyes, he said calmly, You look much better. My Lotta silently glanced at Teacher Poulin. He suddenly said, I need to stay in this small town for the time being. Teacher Poulin thought for a moment and said, Why do you think I will help you with this? My Lotta said expressionlessly, I don't owe anyone anything. Besides, you can't just stand by and watch, right? Teacher Poulin smiled slightly and did not say anything else. They quickly left. After eating something, Teacher Poulin gave my Lotta a simple change of clothes and a wig. Then he brought him to a church. Teacher Poulin told my Lotta that he had a good relationship with the priest here. My Lotta could temporarily stay here for the time being. However, he could not eat and stay for free. He would need to do some chores. My Lotta thought for a moment and agreed. Perhaps compared to free help, he was more willing to accept this kind of thing with a price. Don't worry, I won't do anything to this priest. When my Lotta said something that could be considered a guarantee, it sounded especially stiff. He was probably not used to expressing anything like this. In response, Teacher Poulin only nodded. He told him that if he needed anything, he could go to the house last night to find him. He would be happy to do something for him. Before leaving, Teacher Poulin prayed for a moment in the church before saying goodbye to the priest. He had to go to school. There were two classes in the morning. The second class just happened to be the new student's class. Teacher Poulin felt more and more that this new student was very interesting. He could not help but feel an indescribable sense of anticipation. When he left, Mylota didn't come out to see him off. Mylota hid in the back garden of the church alone, thinking about something. In fact, he thought that since the crystal given by the Lord God was lost, and he had strangely lost his power at this time, the only thing he could do now was to stay in this town. Because the crystal had once reacted, King of Hell was nearby. However, other than the mysterious expert who was wearing a black ceremonial robe and had killed 3 of his companions, Mylota had successively encountered the powerful old human mage, Uncle Bick. Last night, he had also encountered the inhuman Teacher Poulin, whose abilities were unknown. Wasn't it said that the Inhumans in a modern world kept a low profile? What kind of luck did he have to meet 3 in such a short period of time? Could it be that these people are actually here for Hell King? Are they all from Magician Association? Uneasiness makes people suspicious. Mylota gradually became deeply worried about the unknown future of his position. Can you help me clean the courtyard? The voice came from the church priest with a kind smile on his face. At this time, he was slowly walking over with a broom in his hand. Mylota blinked his eyes. He really wanted to set this place on fire. I have already applied for leave. I applied for a month's leave. When are you going to leave? Before the class started, Claudia mysteriously stuffed a small note into the hand of Boss Luo, who had just sat down. This female student probably had a swift and decisive personality. But to apply for a month's leave in one go, it surprised Luocchio. Boss Luo thought for a while and started to play the small note game with Claudia in class. How long do you need to prepare, boss? The shortest is 1 day. I need to pack my luggage. Also, I need to go and exchange some foreign currency. I also need to find a place to stay, so 1 day is the shortest. Also, we need a translator, Claudia. You just need to prepare the luggage. I will prepare the rest, boss. Are you trying to woo me, Claudia? The tone suddenly became strange. Boss Luo looked at the note and subconsciously looked around him. He thought for a while before continuing to write. No, boss. Then we need 2 rooms for the whole trip. I will calculate the final expenses of this trip with you when I come back. All the expenses will be on me, but you have to pay for it first, Claudia. Okay, boss. The game of passing notes had come to an end. Teacher Poulin, who was in the middle of a lecture, passed by Claudia's seat and casually tapped her table twice. Claudia was so frightened that she hurriedly lowered her head to look at her textbook. Poulin smiled and then glanced at Luocchio intentionally or unintentionally. The boss met the teacher's gaze and smiled slightly. Poulin shook his head, rolled his eyes, and continued to teach. There's a question. It is commonly believed that God is omnipotent. The question is whether God can create a rock that he can't move. The question itself, can it be used as an argument to deny the existence of God? Student Claudia, your answer? The top student who had just finished passing the note didn't know what Poulin had said before. She could only hurriedly stand up, lowered her head, and crazily flipped through the textbook. Finally, she found that the textbook didn't mention this at all. She could only nod and say with certainty, of course it can. Since God is omnipotent, how can there be a rock that he can't lift? Poulin just smiled and waved his hand, signaling Claudia to sit down. He then looked around and asked, is there anyone else who has a different opinion? All the students shook their heads. Poulin still didn't say anything. He just walked slowly between the seats. Finally, he came to Boss Luo's side, looked down at him, and asked with a smile, you think so too? Boss Luo just shook his head. Poulin asked curiously, why? Boss Luo answered, the omnipotent God can create a rock that he can't lift. Poulin looked at everyone and said indifferently, if he is omnipotent, why can't he lift a rock? Boss Luo said indifferently, I don't know, but God can because he is omnipotent, because you don't know how he does it, but he can. So what you need to wonder is how he does it, not why he can't lift a rock despite being omnipotent. So, Poulin's eyes lit up. Boss Luo raised his head and said, please call God here. Teacher Poulin smiled. The students were more or less surprised, but the more surprising part had yet to come. because Teacher Pu Lin directly said at this moment, I like this answer. This semester, I'll give you 1 credit for this course. Oh, did Professor Pulin make an unspeakable deal with the new student? It was impossible for outsiders to know if there was an unspeakable deal between teachers and students. The students here didn't seem to be very interested in gossip. They preferred to socialize with each other. It was lunchtime again, and a lazy atmosphere filled the campus. Today was the first time Professor Pulin came to the newly established activity club, Butterfly Society. He didn't find the sudden appearance of Butterfly Society and the exquisite layout in such a short time. As a group of people with special abilities, they always had a way to do things beyond the knowledge of ordinary people. This place is very special. Professor Pulin sized up the layout in the activity room and joked, "It's like walking into another space." Boss Luo said, "This may be another space." Grandmaster Pu Lin smiled and said, "In that case, you will be even more terrifying than I imagined." Boss Luo asked curiously, "Do I look very scary?" Teacher Pu Lin shook his head and said lightly, "To be able to freely control one's own existence or non-existence is already very terrifying in itself. If on top of this foundation, one can still achieve a seamless transformation. Tell me, would you be afraid of having such a person by your side?" Luochio poured him a glass of water. "Teacher, have you seen God?" "Every day." Pulin said casually, "I still have the habit of praying every day, so I can see God every day. So what is the purpose of this club?" "Helping others solve some problems for a fee. Of course, simply talking is also fine." Boss Luo added, "As long as you are here." Pulin asked curiously, "Can I join too?" "As long as you need it." Luochio smiled. "Anytime." Teacher Pu Lin lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Soon after, he shook his head and said, "I think I suddenly heard a tempting voice. It seems that this might really be another place. It might not be a good thing to stay here for too long." Luochio didn't say anything, just closed his eyes as if he was resting. Professor Pulin didn't feel bored. He took out a fairy tale book and began to read quietly. Only the sound of pages being flipped could be heard occasionally. Pulin suddenly let out a chuckle. Luochio slowly opened his eyes. Pulin looked at him and smiled. "I saw an interesting story. Do you want to listen?" Luochio nodded. Pulin cleared his throat and said, "One day, after the farmer and the moneyman died, they came to heaven at the same time. Heaven opened the door for them and let the moneyman enter first. He heard beautiful singing and laughter from inside. Even through the door, the farmer could feel the happiness inside. After a period of time, the door of heaven opened again and let the farmer in. The farmer walked through the door of heaven with an unusual yearning, but he didn't get the warm welcome he expected. The treatment wasn't bad, but compared to the moneyman's treatment, he couldn't help but feel disappointed. So he found God and asked him why there was such a difference in heaven. What do you think God answered?" Boss Luo shook his head. "What did God answer?" Grandmaster Plin said, "God said, because of people like the farmer, there are people coming to heaven every moment. But people like the moneyman, he is the only one in 100 years. Boss Luo smiled. "Teacher, do you like to read fairy tales?" Pulin said, "I don't know why, but I feel that fairy tales are more interesting than other reading materials. Maybe it's because from the beginning, the things written in fairy tales are closer to the truth than the long-term academic research. We get close to it when we are young, then get away from it. As we grow up, we start to pursue it again." Boss Luo asked, "What happened to the farmer?" Pulin was startled, then shook his head and said, "It didn't write. It ended. This is probably the disadvantage of fairy tales. They're too ideal and unrealistic. Just like how it wrote that Snow White lived a happy life, but it didn't mention the trivial things after her marriage with the prince. Maybe the princess and the prince didn't get along well after marriage, and the prince might have cheated on the maid." Boss Luo didn't react much to Pulin's sudden humor. Pulin shook his head. "Stories have endings, but life has no endings. But life wants an ending, but the ending is the same, death." Boss Luo suddenly said, "Death is the end?" "In theory, it is," Pulin said seriously. "But in fact, it's just the end of a reincarnation. After reincarnation, it's a new reincarnation. Do you know? When the world develops to a certain extent, it will enter into destruction, push everything down, and then develop again. Boss Luo said indifferently, "Teacher, are you talking about the flood that washed the world?" Poulin shook his head and said, "No, even during the flood that washed the world, it still left the ark, the fire of civilization. The real destruction is when everything is completely destroyed, leaving nothing behind, so that civilization can develop again from a new perspective. The world is restarted." Boss Luo was silent. This part of understanding was not something that could be grasped simply by living in the subworld, unless one experienced it personally, unless one observed it from the outside, or rather, from some other source. At this time, seeing that Luochio was silent, Poulin said slowly, "Why, you don't believe it?" Luochio said casually, "These are teacher's conjectures." No. Teacher Poulin, however, shook his head. "You may find this information hard to believe, but it's true that it happened. Even a number of times it happened is far beyond your imagination. You may not know that outside the world we live in now, there are countless similar worlds. They each have different civilizations, and in these civilizations, there may be you and me." Luochio blinked and suddenly asked, "So, teacher, you have been outside?" "No, I just received some information." Teacher Poulin shook his head. Shortly after, he said in a low voice, "A group called the Secret Society. Their people found me many years ago." Secret Society? Chapter 1507. Secret Society was one of the most famous, mysterious organizations in the dimensional crevice. It was generally believed that Secret Society, Transcendence, and Door of Truth were the most famous transcendents in the dimensional crevice. Among them, Secret Society was the most mysterious. Its mission was unknown, and the number of members was unknown. It was said that only when the members of Secret Society actively exposed themselves could some information be obtained. Luochio did not know why Mr. Poulin suddenly mentioned Secret Society. It seemed inappropriate, but Mr. Poulin always had his own reasons for doing things. As for whether the reasons were reasonable or not, it was up to the individual to make sense. From a name, it seems to be a very mysterious organization. Boss Luo smiled. "So this secret society comes from another world?" He wanted to know how much Teacher Poulin knew. There were too many illogical places in the subworld 003 that he was in, as well as many traces that it had been altered before. It was possible that it had been altered by the previous owner of the shop, but this was not something that was unexpected. Boss Luo had changed the history of this subworld more than once. Especially the last time, if Araya had any emotions, he would have exploded. Did you see that? The script. TSK. Something like that. So, since Boss Luo had done this, he naturally had no right to blame the previous owner for doing the same. Right? Luochio could know this because of the shop's uniqueness. After Transcendence left the subworld, they would naturally know about it. But if they could know about it in the subworld, there would not be many people in the subworld 003. Luochio imagined that Kelowna Shinryu would know something, but at most, he would treat the outside world as a larger whole, similar to the heavens mentioned in the myths of Kelowna. He would not associate it with the problem of countless subworlds. The owner of the Radiance Tower of the Magician Association probably knew about it. After all, he went to the Lost Crack once and saw Kane, who came from the Dimensional Crevice. Whereas Teacher Poulin, Luochio didn't know much about the Secret Society. In fact, this was the first time he heard about the Secret Society from the people outside the shop. Therefore, since he didn't want to waste free information, Boss Luo instantly became eager to learn. "You look like the Annie next door who heard about the supermarket discount." At this moment, Teacher Poulin shook his head. As he ridiculed, he continued to say, "Between the countless worlds with different processes but the core should be the same, there exists an even wider space. It's called the Dimensional Crevice. In the crevice, there are some inhumans who have escaped from the cages of various worlds. The secret society was formed by individuals among these inhumans. Its purpose is to record everything that happened. Record? Boss Luo thought for a moment. Why record? Mr. Poulin said. Then what do you think it is? Luochio thought for a moment and said, usually it is to find something, for example, the truth behind it. Of course, recording is fine too, but relatively speaking, doing nothing and just watching from the sidelines should be difficult to attract too much recognition. You're right. Mr. Poulin nodded. The secret society has very few members to begin with. There are probably only 1 or 2 external members in each world. The external members are responsible for recording everything that happens in their world within a certain period of time. When they die, the official members of the secret society will descend and take away this part of the record. At the same time, they will choose a new successor. Of course, the original recorder can also recommend. So, teacher, you are the recorder. Luochio looked at Mr. Poulin. Responsible for recording everything that happens in this world? Mr. Poulin shook his head. No, I am not. They did find me, but I rejected them. Originally, they needed to erase this part of my memory, but they failed. I made it look like they succeeded. They probably underestimated my ability, so I still have the memory of talking to them. Of course, because I rejected them from the start, I don't know much. They probably won't let you do this for free. The conditions might be very good. Luochio smiled and said, You rejected them. Don't you feel that it is a pity? I'm not interested in what happens outside. Mr. Poulin shrugged. I will not die. Even if the world reboots, I will not die. I know this very well. It is like a piece of knowledge buried in my consciousness. So, I will know sooner or later. Teacher, why are you telling me this? Luochio asked curiously. Mr. Poulin said casually. After they left, they implanted a thought in me. That is, to find a person who could be the successor. Of course, this thought was later sealed by me. But I feel that since I have rejected the other party, if it is convenient, it is not impossible to find a new candidate for them. After all, I have obtained some impressive information for free. So, I should do something to achieve a balance. Teacher, you plan to choose me? Boss Luo blinked. That's right. Mr. Poulin nodded. Boss Luo was surprised. Logically speaking, I didn't have much contact with teacher. Even short, what makes you think I can do it? Intuition, Mr. Poulin answered casually. My intuition tells me that you are very suitable for this. Probably because your personality is more like the member of this secret society I met who came to collect records. On the other hand, I feel that your ability to control your own existence is very suitable for this. If you are willing, I think that the 3 measurements of the female students in the school will no longer be a secret to you. That kind of ability is not used to peek at the 3 measurements of the female students. Luochio shook his head. He was not interested in Poulin's sudden and dangerous thoughts, and he was even less interested in becoming a recorder. If I reject, does teacher plan to erase the memory of this conversation to me? Why would I want to erase your memory? Teacher Poulin asked in astonishment. I don't have the obligation to keep secrets for the secret society anyway. Of course, if you want to keep secrets, I won't disagree. Luochio suddenly understood. Mr. Poulin was actually a big mouth. Those people from the secret society left right away after you rejected them? What about the records? Luochio immediately asked. Mr. Poulin shrugged. There seems to be another recorder. There seems to be 2 in this world. So after one of them died, the secret society, people didn't seem to be in a hurry. Another one? I don't know. Mr. Poulin shrugged. I feel like the more I know, the more troublesome things will come to me. I said before, it is easier for my ability to lose control. It is safer to be in a stable state. Luochio said calmly. It may be more stable than you think. It is just an illusion. Mr. Poulin shook his head and then raised his left hand. He slowly took off the white glove on his left hand. His palm was pale and bloodless, as if it was made of white jade. Mr. Poulin directly reached out his left hand to touch the rose in the vase on the table. When his fingers approached the rose, but before he really touched it, the bright petals began to rapidly wither. When his fingers completely touched the petals, the flower in the vase had completely withered. Do you understand? This is out of my control. Mr. Poulin seemed to be talking about something unrelated to him. I can't directly touch anyone with my hands. Luocio suddenly said, Teacher, do you want to give up this power? Why should I give it up? Teacher Poulin shook his head and said, I'm not that pretentious. Because I feel that this power brings trouble. I loathe it. On the contrary, without this power, it would make people feel uneasy. At most, I will only consider how to fully control it. Perhaps I can also provide you with a way to control this power, Boss Luo said in a low voice. Mr. Poulin opened his mouth in surprise and then looked down at his left hand as if he was thinking. After a long time, he raised his head. I need to seriously consider it. Consider what? Luocio asked curiously. Consider whether to control it or whether to trust me. Of course, consider whether to control it or not. Mr. Poulin said casually, As for what you said, I don't doubt it. This is also the most terrifying part of your ability. You see, when I talk to you, I even subconsciously don't doubt a word you say. So, you really don't plan to record the 3 measurements of every female student in the school? Teacher, how obsessed are you with the 3 measurements of female students? Last night, you said you have never been to an adult place. Boss Luo was a little dumbfounded. Facing Mr. Poulin's low desire at this time, he suddenly remembered the super sea turtle that had no desire and only cared about sleeping at the seaside last year. That sea turtle said that a long time ago, someone once asked it if it had anything it wanted to achieve and gave a black card. But until now, the old sea turtle had never used it. If the person who gave the black card knew, would he be more helpless, just like how he was facing Mr. Poulin now? When I think about it clearly, I will come again. Before leaving, Mr. Poulin left this sentence and then left in a hurry. He was not afraid of anything. The reason why he left in such a hurry was because he had to go to class. We're responsible, teacher. Boss Luo looked at Mr. Poulin's figure disappearing under the shade of the tree in front of the windowsill. In his hand, there was a gray crystal. At night, Claudia was wearing a black women's jacket and carrying her luggage through the alley. She stood in front of a secluded entrance of the school and was looking around. She even looked at the time from time to time, seeming a little anxious. The reason for her anxiousness was that she had an appointment with her new classmate. They were going to go to a distant country to find clues about the disappearance of her father, Professor Siegeru. On one hand, she was worried about her father's clues. On the other hand, she was excited that she couldn't explain. This was like an exciting adventure, an adventure that young people couldn't resist, an adventure that young people yearned for. But how could she be so careless? It was as if she was possessed. She didn't consider anything clearly before agreeing to go to a foreign country with a man she had only met a few times. She didn't even know anything about the other party's background. I'm probably crazy, right? Claudia laughed at herself, then took a deep breath and patted her cheeks hard. Are you coming or not? Bastard. She suddenly felt a wave of fear and had the thought of retreating. She pulled her suitcase and lowered her head, turning around to leave. But she had only taken a few steps when Claudia walked back with her head lowered like a defeated dog. Good evening, student Claudia. The female top student from theology college suddenly raised her head and widened her eyes. She looked at the young man who suddenly appeared in front of her. She opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. Where did he come from? Had he been waiting for a long time? Boss Luo looked at the time at this time. His appointment with Claudia was at 8:00 in the evening, and it was now 7:50 in the evening. Claudia shook her head. Since we're already here, there's no need to talk about who came first or how long we have to wait. So, shall we go now? How do we get there? Why do we have to wait here instead of at the station? Isn't that more convenient? Also, where's your luggage? Come with me first, student Claudia, Luocio said casually. Claudia said indifferently, just call me by my name. I'll feel more comfortable when I hear it. Luo. Boss Luo nodded with a smile and then walked in front. Claudia subconsciously followed, but gradually found that something was wrong, because she clearly found that even a fool could see that he was walking directly into the college and was on the way to the old school building of theology college. Hey, aren't we going to go? Why did you come back here? Claudia couldn't help but bite the bullet. At the same time, She secretly held an anti-pervert spray in her hand and kept a distance of 1 meter from him. Did you forget something and want to come back here to get it? Not all. All right. In front of the Butterfly Society, Boss Luo slowly turned around and smiled. We're here. As he spoke, he directly opened the door and walked into the Butterfly Society. Claudia frowned. In the end, she took a deep breath and followed him into the room. But when she stepped through the door, she was immediately stunned. She saw the pyramid. The Great Pyramid of Giza? Where's this?